Look down at your hands for a second. I mean, really just think about them. We like to think we are the ones entirely driving the car of our own lives.
Right, like you're completely in charge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see a stop sign, your brain processes the red octagon. You consciously decide to move your foot to the brake pedal, and the car stops.
It feels entirely clean, completely voluntary.
Yeah, because we desperately want to believe in our own absolute autonomy. We
Yeah.
want to think we're always in the driver's seat.
Oh, for sure. We cling to that idea.
But right in the introduction of today's source material, there is this bold and honestly kind of unsettling statement. It simply says humans are marionettes.
Yeah, that is a wild claim. It completely forces a paradigm shift right out of the gate.
It really does, because if you accept that premise, you have to acknowledge that attached to our thoughts, our preferences, and like our daily behaviors are these invisible strings,
Strings that are guiding us continually and completely outside of our active awareness.
which poses this immediate, really heavy tension. I mean, if someone knows how to pull those strings, they can essentially control behavior.
Right, they become the puppeteer.
Exactly. But the big question is it actually possible to become that puppeteer without crossing the line into some sort of dark art?
And that tension right there is the practical weight of the reality we are unpacking today.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this deep dive is all about. We're looking at the foundational setup of Nick Kolenda's book, Methods of Persuasion. Specifically, we're diving into the acknowledgments, the preface, and the introduction.
And I'll say, for anyone navigating the worlds of business, entrepreneurship, or even just leadership, this foundation is absolutely non-negotiable.
It really is. I mean, we're moving far away from that chaotic, random arsenal of internet marketing hacks, the
Oh,
ones.
yeah, the quick fix tricks that clutter everyone's feed.
Right. This text is about building a highly structured, chronological understanding of non-conscious human behavior.
Which is what allows you to ethically guide clients, teams, and customers with actual, reliable precision.
Yes, precision is the key word there.
Yeah.
But to get to that precision, we are actually starting in a really unusual place. The acknowledgments.
Which is usually the section everyone just skims past, right?
Totally. You just assume it's a list of thank yous to the author's family and maybe their editor. You just flip past it to get to chapter 1.
But here, the author uses it to expose this hidden gold mine.
Yeah, he points out that the people who actually discover how human behavior works, the researchers are, in his words, somewhat unlucky.
It highlights a massive structural flaw in how knowledge is distributed in our society today.
Let's break that down. What does he mean by unlucky?
Well, you have these truly brilliant minds, right? People like Robert Cialdini, Daniel Kahneman, Dan O'Reilly, John Barr.
Huge names in the academic world.
Exactly. And they dedicate their entire lives to decoding the mechanics of human behavior through this incredibly rigorous experimentation.
Right.
Yet outside of academic circles, the vast majority of these researchers just remain completely unknown to the general public.
And a lot of that boils down to the whole publish or perish culture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The incentive structure in academia is entirely stacked against mass communication.
Because to get tenure or to secure any sort of grant funding, researchers are under unrelenting pressure to publish in top-level academic journals.
Right. And let's be real here. Nobody is browsing the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology on their Sunday morning coffee run.
Definitely not. I mean, they aren't reading them because those journals are inherently designed to be inaccessible to the average person.
They are incredibly dense. They're written in this highly specialized jargon, heavily focused on methodology and statistical significance.
Instead of focusing on practical application.
Exactly. And the text points out this fascinating dilemma. If a researcher actually decides to translate their brilliant, peer-reviewed findings into a mainstream book for the public, they get pushback.
Oh, big time. They're often actively stigmatized by their academic peers.
Yeah, they are viewed as sellouts who are somehow diluting the rigor of the science just for mass consumption.
It's so frustrating because it effectively traps the world's most valuable business tools inside this locked underground vault.
A vault guarded by academic gatekeepers.
Exactly. The actual proven mechanics of why people buy things, why they change their minds, or why they conform to a group, all of that is guarded by people who look down on anyone trying to hand those tools out to the public.
And that's why Kolenda specifically names researchers right up front in the acknowledgments. People like Gavin Fitzsimons, John Cacioppo, Leon Festinger, and Ap Dijksterhuis.
I'm glad he does that. It gives them the utmost recognition because their work is the spark.
Right. Their research is what truly drives our understanding of behavior, even if the academic system kind of keeps them in the shadows.
So the takeaway for you, the listener, is really about where you source your strategies.
Yeah, you have to be careful where you're getting your information.
Like if you are an entrepreneur trying to figure out why your landing page isn't converting, or maybe a manager trying to motivate a totally burned out team.
The true secrets aren't in superficial, recycled pop business blogs.
No, they're not. The real gold is hidden in that dense, peer-reviewed psychology and behavioral economics research.
Which brings us to how the author actually accessed that vault in the first place.
Right, the preface introduces a background that initially seems, well, completely at odds with rigorous academic research.
It really does. For 10 years, the author was a professional mind reader.
I have to admit, when I first read Mind Reader in the text, my brain immediately went to crystal balls, cold reading, or some sort of cheesy psychic parlor trick.
Which sounds like the exact opposite of peer-reviewed science.
Exactly. It sounds like complete pseudoscience.
But the author anticipates that exact skepticism. He shuts it down immediately.
Yeah, he explicitly states there are no supernatural powers involved whatsoever.
Right. What a mentalist or a professional mind reader actually relies on is a highly developed, meticulously structured system of psychological influence.
It's the illusion of mind reading.
Exactly. It's not about receiving some psychic signal from an audience member's brain.
It's about implanting the thought so subtly that the person actually believes they came up with it entirely on their own.
And the methodology behind that is the truly fascinating part. Over a decade of performing on stage, he developed a method to unconsciously influence people's thoughts.
So the mind reading aspect is really just the theatrical reveal at the end.
Precisely. Because the participant is completely unaware that their thoughts were influenced by the environment or the performer's subtle cues.
So the performer simply reveals the thought they deliberately implanted in the first place.
Right. And to the participant, it feels like an absolute violation of the laws of physics. They genuinely feel their mind has been read.
I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now.
Yeah.
You're probably thinking, well, I'd never fall for a stage magic trick in a boardroom.
But this isn't about top hats and magic wands.
Not at all. Think about a magician doing a card force.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The magician fans out a deck of cards and says, pick a card, any card.
And you look at the cards, you hover your hand over them, you make a choice, you feel completely autonomous.
You feel totally in control. But the entire environment, the way the cards are spaced out, the subtle pacing of the magician's hands, the specific verbal framing, all of it was meticulously designed.
Designed to ensure you picked the exact card the magician needed you to pick all along.
Exactly. The choice was designed by the environment.
Now take that exact same psychological mechanism and apply it to something mundane, like a restaurant menu.
Oh, this is a great example.
You sit down at a nice restaurant, and right at the top of the menu, highlighted in a fancy little box, is a $150 seafood tower.
And you immediately think, well, I'm absolutely not spending $150 on dinner tonight.
Right. But suddenly you look down, and the $45 steak right below it looks incredibly reasonable.
Even though $45 is still a lot for a steak.
Exactly. The restaurant actually wanted you to buy the steak all along. That $150 item is the card force.
It's a decoy. It's just there to anchor your perception of price.
You feel totally autonomous in choosing the steak, but your choice was heavily guided by the architect of the menu.
You are guiding the choice, not forcing it. The customer still feels like they're holding the steering wheel.
But you've gently paved the road so they inevitably arrive at your destination.
And this is where the author's two worlds really collide. He took that practical, stage-tested understanding of human influence and combined it with his degrees in marketing and psychology.
He spent his time sifting through those thousands of locked-away academic journal articles, trying to pinpoint the proven scientific principles behind his performances.
And what he discovered is that the psychological forces guiding our behavior aren't just parlor tricks.
No, they are pervasive, deeply ingrained evolutionary mechanisms. They operate every single day without our conscious awareness.
So if you understand how to arrange those forces, you essentially become the puppeteer holding the strings of the marionette.
Right. But to scale that, to take it from a one-on-one stage performance to a repeatable system for business, you need a concrete framework.
Because you can't just wing it in a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign.
Exactly. And that is where the book introduces a very specific distinction from pretty much all the other persuasion resources out there.
The methods process.
Right. Because most persuasion literature treats influence like a chaotic grab bag of tricks.
Yeah, you read a blog post and get a list of 50 cognitive biases, and you just sort of throw them at a client hoping one of them sticks.
It's completely arbitrary.
It's like throwing a handful of darts at a wall while blindfolded and just praying for a bullseye.
But the alternative presented here is a strategically arranged chronological 7-step process.
Chronological is the key word there.
It is. The core argument is that human decision-making follows a natural biological sequence.
So if you want to persuade someone to perform a specific task, you absolutely must follow that sequence to bypass the brain's natural defense mechanisms.
And that sequence follows the acronym METHODS.
It's literally the methods of persuasion, but methods is also the map itself. Let's walk through the psychology of this skeletal structure, because this really dictates everything else.
Let's do it.
So step 1 is the M mold their perception.
Right. Before you even articulate a request, you have to shape how the target views the world in that specific moment.
Because the human brain uses past context to evaluate present information.
Exactly. If you don't anchor their perception first, like the $150 seafood tower anchoring the perception of price, your subsequent request is going to be evaluated against whatever random context they just happen to have in their head.
You leave it entirely up to chance.
It's just terrible for business.
Exactly. So then we move to step 2, which is the Elicit congruent attitudes.
This step is all about getting the person to physically or mentally align with the direction you want them to go long before the big ask.
And it relies heavily on the psychological principle of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it?
It does. Humans have this deep, driving need for their beliefs and their actions to remain consistent.
Right. Nobody wants to feel like a hypocrite.
Exactly. So if you can elicit a small, seemingly insignificant attitude or action that aligns with your ultimate goal, their brain will actually naturally adjust their broader beliefs to remain consistent with that initial small step.
That is so powerful. Okay, step 3 is the T-trigger social pressure.
Which makes sense because we are fundamentally tribal animals.
Right. Our survival literally used to depend on remaining part of the group. If you got kicked out of the tribe, you didn't survive the winter.
Exactly. So if you can frame your request as aligning with the social norm or what the majority of their peers are doing, the non-conscious mind feels this intense biological pressure to conform.
Just to avoid social ostracization.
Yep, it's wired into us.
Okay, step 4 is the H. Habituate your message. Basically, making the idea familiar.
This is the mere exposure effect. The human brain treats novelty as a potential threat.
Because something new could be dangerous. It requires heavy cognitive processing to evaluate it.
Right. But if you subtly habituate the target to your message or your brand beforehand, it processes much more smoothly.
It feels familiar, and the brain essentially equates familiarity with safety and truth.
Spot on. Then we hit step 5, the O, optimize your message.
This is where you actually tweak the delivery of the request based on how people naturally evaluate information.
Because how you frame the message dictates how it's received.
Like, are you framing it as a potential gain, or are you framing it as a way to avoid a loss?
Exactly. Depending on the context, optimizing those specific words can entirely flip the target's response from a no to a yes.
Which brings us to step 6, the D, drive their momentum.
Because even if someone genuinely wants to comply with your request, human inertia is incredibly strong.
We are lazy creatures by nature.
Very lazy. Driving momentum involves injecting the right incentives or utilizing limitations like scarcity and urgency to overcome that initial activation energy.
You have to give them a reason to act right now, not tomorrow.
Exactly. And finally, step 7 is the S, sustain their compliance.
Because a single yes is rarely the actual end goal, right?
Very rarely. Sustaining compliance is about ensuring the behavior sticks long after the initial interaction.
Often by helping the target internalize the choice, so it actually becomes a part of their identity.
METHODS, the methods process.
Now, I have to pause and push back on this a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because when you lay it out back to back, like that mold, elicit, trigger, habituate, optimize, drive, sustain it, it sounds incredibly rigid.
I can see how it sounds that way.
I mean, it sounds like a manufacturing assembly line for producing human compliance. In the real world, in a fluid conversation with a client or a dynamic negotiation with a vendor, how does one possibly keep track of a 7-step acronym without sounding like a robot just reading from a flowchart.
It's a really crucial concern, and the text actually clarifies this point directly. This acronym is not a rigid script you must recite line by line.
Okay, so it's not a script.
No, it is a chronological compass. It ensures you are operating in harmony with how the brain naturally processes information.
So you have flexibility within the framework.
Tons of flexibility. You can pick and choose which specific persuasion tactics you want to implement within those steps, and honestly, you might even skip some steps depending on the scenario.
But the order is what matters.
The order is everything.
The timeline is the real takeaway here. You cannot ask for the sale, which is driving momentum, the D, before you've primed the environment, which is molding perception, the M.
Right, it just won't work.
If I walk up to a complete stranger on the street and immediately ask them to invest $10,000 in my startup, I am pulling the wrong string at the exact wrong time.
You're going to hit an immediate wall of defense mechanisms.
Because I haven't molded their perception of my authority, I haven't elicited an attitude of trust, and I certainly haven't triggered any social proof.
You jump straight to the very end of the sequence. The methods process is all about systemically removing the friction of human defense mechanisms step by step.
And discussing the systemic removal of defense mechanisms brings us right to the ethical elephant in the room.
Which we definitely need to talk about.
The author addresses this head-on in a section he calls last-minute background info. Because when we start talking about implanting thoughts, pulling strings, and bypassing defense mechanisms, it naturally sounds a bit villainous.
It sounds manipulative, frankly.
Yeah. Are we just manipulating people here?
The author provides a very hard, very clear delineation between persuasion and manipulation. And it starts with defining the tactics themselves.
Right. The psychological principles, things like priming, anchoring, cognitive dissonance, they are entirely neutral.
They do not possess a moral alignment. They are neither inherently ethical nor unethical.
It is the exact same dynamic as a doctor prescribing a potent medication versus a dealer pushing a highly addictive drug.
That's a great way to look at it.
The chemical mechanism interacting with the human body might be incredibly similar. The biology doesn't change. But the intent, the context, and the ultimate outcome for the person taking it that defines the ethics of the exchange.
Exactly. Or think of a hammer. A hammer is just a tool.
Right, you can use a hammer to build a house for someone, or you can use it to break their window. The hammer doesn't care.
The text defines manipulation as a malicious attempt to influence another person through questionable or blatantly unethical tactics like lying and deceit.
And usually for sole personal gain at the expense of the other person.
Exactly. Persuasion, conversely, is using these powerful, neutral principles with proper care and concern for the other person.
The author draws a very clear line in the sand on this. He states he wholeheartedly opposes anyone trying to use these tactics to manipulate.
And he gives this ultimate golden rule in the text, which is this. You should never try to persuade people to perform actions if you know that those actions are not in their best interest.
It demands a fundamental baseline of empathy and ethical responsibility from the reader.
It really does. If your product is terrible, or if you know a particular decision will harm your employee, utilizing the methods process to force their compliance is pure manipulation.
But if you genuinely hold the solution to someone's problem, using methods to help them see that value and take action, that is ethical persuasion.
Right. Think about your own business or your daily interactions. We all have customers, clients, or team members who legitimately need what we are offering.
But human nature just gets in the way. Fear of change, hesitation, distraction, information overload.
Exactly. Ethical persuasion isn't about tricking them. It is about ethically designing the environment to remove that friction.
Helping them discover and commit to solutions that genuinely improve their lives.
And to execute that effectively, the text lays out a specific vocabulary of influence to ensure absolute clarity as we move forward into the book.
Right, there are a few specific terms we need to lock in. First is the target.
This is simply the person or group of people you are trying to persuade.
So if you want a coworker to cover your shift on Friday, the coworker is the target.
Exactly. Then there is the request and the message.
The request is the specific behavior you want the target to perform, like actually covering the shift.
And the message is the actual medium or communication you use to persuade them.
Such as the email you write or the face-to-face conversation you have.
The text notes these two terms will often be used interchangeably depending on the context, but that's the basic breakdown.
But the most critical distinction in this vocabulary section, I really want to highlight this because it changes how you view the brain entirely, is the deliberate use of the word non-conscious.
Yes. The author intentionally and aggressively avoids using the words subconscious or unconscious.
Which is fascinating because those are the words everyone uses.
They are, but it is a vital psychological distinction. The terms subconscious and unconscious carry a very heavy, almost Freudian baggage.
They imply that there is a specific, physical, localized part of the human brain that acts as a hidden vault for all these secret processes.
Like there's a dark, locked basement in your mind where all your repressed thoughts and secret desires live.
And that persuasion is just about picking the lock to that basement.
And the text states plainly, scientifically, that simply isn't the case.
There is no isolated anatomical subconscious zone in the brain tissue.
No. The term non-conscious is much more scientifically accurate because it makes absolutely no anatomical claim.
It simply refers to any and all processes that are occurring outside of our active, immediate conscious awareness at any given moment.
I love this reframing. It completely removes the mysticism from the process.
It really does. It is exactly like the background apps running on your smartphone right now.
Oh, that analogy works perfectly.
Right. You are actively looking at your screen, maybe reading an article that is your conscious awareness.
But in the background, without you looking at it, your phone is constantly doing things.
Checking for emails, updating your GPS location, syncing your photos to the cloud, downloading software updates.
And there isn't a secret basement in your phone's hardware where this happens.
Exactly. It is just processing data outside of your active focus. But those background apps are absolutely draining the battery, using up RAM, and shaping how the entire device performs.
That's exactly how the brain works. The brain delegates tasks to the non-conscious to conserve energy.
Because conscious thought is extremely metabolically expensive.
Very expensive. If you had to consciously process every single piece of sensory data, the temperature of the room, the hum of the air conditioner, the exact pressure of your shoes on your feet, your brain would completely overload.
So it pushes the vast majority of environmental processing to the non-conscious.
And most of the techniques in this book exert their influence by communicating directly with those background processes.
People will be completely unaware that these principles are guiding their behavior, just as you are unaware of the constant data refresh on your phone.
So practically speaking, this means you need to stop viewing persuasion as an attempt to hypnotize someone or tap into some mystical brain zone.
Right. You focus on tweaking the subtle, everyday environmental cues that naturally fall just outside your target's direct attention.
Change the data the background apps are receiving, and you change the output of the human.
Which brings us to the final major concept the author establishes before the deep dive truly begins.
It is the philosophy of understanding the why to invent the how.
The author asks a really fair question of himself in the introduction. If his goal is to be clear, concise, and provide actionable business tools, why is he bothering to teach the dense underlying psychology from all those academic journals?
Why not just give the reader a quick start list of actionable marketing tricks and call it a day?
Yeah, just give us the 10 things to say to close a deal. But he provides two main reasons for doing it this way.
The first is about establishing credibility and trust. By citing the actual peer-reviewed research to support every single principle, the reader gains an appreciation for the sheer effectiveness of the application.
It elevates the text from just a guru's hunch to proven, rigorous science.
But the second reason is the true core of the book's value.
To quote the text directly, in order to take full advantage of the how, you need to understand the why.
He leans on that famous proverb. You know the one. Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime.
Think about how often you see an entrepreneur or a marketer completely copy a hack they saw go viral online.
Oh, it happens all the time.
They copy the exact subject line of a successful email campaign. They copy the exact layout and button color of a competitor's landing page. They memorize a specific script to close a sale.
And then it completely fails.
Right. They get 0 conversions. They are left bewildered, wondering what went wrong when they followed the steps perfectly.
It fails because they only copied the how. They just took the fit.
Because they didn't understand the underlying psychological mechanism, the why the tactic actually worked in the original scenario, they failed to realize that their specific context required a completely different approach.
Their target audience or their market environment was different. The underlying psychological principle might have been valid, but the superficial application was blindly copy-pasted into an incompatible situation.
Context is everything. But if you understand the underlying psychology, If you truly understand why non-conscious behavior happens and how the cognitive gears turn, you break completely free from those rigid step-by-step templates.
You don't need to copy your competitors anymore.
You can look at the raw materials of human behavior and start to brainstorm your own custom, highly effective persuasion strategies.
You can tailor them perfectly to your unique business model, your unique personality, and the specific needs of your customers.
You learn how to fish in your own pond.
It is the difference between being a technician who only knows how to press a specific button when a red light flashes, and being an engineer who understands how the entire machine is wired and can therefore build a new machine from scratch.
I love that. We have covered incredible ground just in the foundational setup of this text.
We really have. We've unlocked the academic vault to reveal the immense power of non-conscious influence that usually stays trapped in peer-reviewed journals.
And we've established that effective persuasion isn't supernatural magic from a stage performer. And it certainly isn't malicious manipulation from a con artist.
It is a highly systematic chronological framework, the methods process.
A process that operates quietly on our non-conscious mind, communicating with the background apps entirely outside of our active awareness.
By understanding why we act the way we do, by understanding why we are so often guided like marionettes by our environment, you can step into the role of the architect.
You can ethically design environments, conversations, and systems that guide human behavior in ways that genuinely benefit everyone involved.
Removing the friction that holds people back from making good decisions.
It grants you a profound level of awareness. Once you understand the mechanics of the strings, you can never unsee them.
It changes how you view every interaction.
So here is a thought for you to take with you. The next time you walk into a grocery store, or read a promotional email from a brand, or even sit down for a performance review with your boss, I want you to actively look around your environment.
Really look for them.
Try to spot those invisible strings. Try to notice the subtle cues, the pricing anchors on the menu, the framing of the questions you're asked, the social proof pulling at your attention and shaping your choices before you even realize you've made them.
It's a fascinating exercise.
Because now that we've mapped out the ethical boundaries and the underlying mechanics of the human mind, what exactly happens when we reach out and intentionally pull that very first string?
That's the real question.
And how do we take step one to successfully mold their perception?
I want you to try a quick cognitive exercise with me right now.
It's just wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Exactly. I want you to think of a lucky dwarf.
Get a really clear picture of him in your head.
Got one. Okay, now I want you to go with your immediate, split-second gut reaction and think of a number between 1 and 10. Quick.
Lock it in. Do not change it.
Right. So if you are thinking of the number 7 right now, you might be looking at your device, wondering if we're pulling some kind of cheap parlor trick on you.
It feels incredibly specific, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Almost invasive.
It really does.
Yeah.
But I promise you, it is not a coincidence. It certainly isn't magic. And, it's not telepathy.
No, not at all. It is actually a highly predictable mechanical process playing out inside the architecture of your own brain. And understanding that mechanism unlocks a fundamentally different way of looking at human behavior.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this little number game, it gets right to the absolute core tension of what we are analyzing today.
It really does.
We like to operate under the assumption that our thoughts are strictly our own. We believe that we process information objectively and we make decisions independently.
Which is a nice thought.
Right, it's comforting. But this forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question. To what extent are the decisions you make every single day genuinely yours?
Right.
Or conversely, how much of your cognitive process is being subtly directed by invisible environmental cues that you aren't even consciously registering?
It is a profound tension.
Yeah.
I mean, we aren't talking about something as dramatic or cliche as being a human marionette.
Right, you still have free will.
Exactly, you still have agency. But when you really delve into the cognitive psychology literature, you quickly realize that our environment constructs the framework within which that agency operates.
The boundaries, essentially, yeah.
The parameters of our choices are heavily contoured by the immediate physical and conversational space we occupy.
And that is exactly the terrain we are mapping out today. In this deep dive, we are exploring Chapter 1, which is called Prime Their Mindset, from Nick Kolenda's work on the psychology of influence.
It's a fascinating chapter.
It really is. And for anyone listening who operates in business, leadership, negotiation, or entrepreneurship, understanding this cognitive architecture is just non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
Because we often operate under the delusion that persuasion happens during the pitch, like that it's the data in the slide deck or the sharp logic of the argument that wins the day.
That's the standard assumption, yeah.
But the empirical data suggests that true persuasion happens in the invisible moments before the pitch even begins by altering the psychological lens through which people view reality.
Precisely. And to get there, we really have to start by establishing a baseline understanding of how the brain processes reality in the first place.
Okay, let's set the foundation.
So reality itself, the raw data of the world, is objective. A quarterly earnings report is an objective piece of data. A table is a table. But our perception of that reality is entirely subjective. We do not see reality as it objectively exists. We see it as we are equipped to see it in that specific fleeting moment.
Okay, so what equips us in that moment?
Well, what equips us is dictated by our current active mindset.
Right. And to really break down the mechanics of how this works, we need to look at how the brain handles ambiguity.
Yes, ambiguity is the key here.
Because when information is perfectly clear, the brain processes it relatively straightforwardly. But when information is ambiguous, the brain acts as a cognitive miser.
It's lazy, essentially.
Exactly. It doesn't want to expend the immense energy required to analyze an ambiguous situation from scratch. So instead, it reaches for the most recently activated emotional or cognitive filter to make sense of the gray area.
And that leads us to a beautifully designed study by Fitzsimons and Barg that isolates exactly how a mindset warps the interpretation of objective facts.
I love this study.
It's brilliant. They set out to measure the precise impact of an activated mindset on an ambiguous subject. To do this, they created a fictional, carefully calibrated college student named Mark.
Okay, so I actually have the exact blurb they used here in my notes. Let's look at how meticulously crafted this is to be neutral.
Go for it.
They told participants, Mark is just entering his second year of college. In his first year, he did very well in some classes, but not as well in others. Although he missed some morning classes, overall he had very good attendance. His parents are both doctors, and he is registered in pre-med, but he hasn't really decided if that is what he wants to do.
If you break down the linguistics of that paragraph, every single sentence contains a counterbalance.
Yeah, it's like a seesaw.
Exactly. He did well in some classes, poorly in others. He missed morning classes but had good overall attendance. He's in pre-med, but undecided. It is the literal definition of a blank slate.
Right.
If you view Mark through a negative lens, he's, an unmotivated slacker riding his parents' coattails.
But if you view him through a positive lens, he's a highly capable student taking a measured approach to finding his true calling.
Exactly. So the researchers asked the participants to rate Mark's level of motivation on a scale of 1 to 9. 1 being completely unmotivated, 9 being highly motivated.
But the evaluation of Mark wasn't the actual experiment, was it?
No, the real experiment happened before they ever read the paragraph.
Right, the setup.
Before the participants received the bio, they were asked to complete what was presented as an entirely unrelated questionnaire, effectively a distractor task.
Sneaky.
Very. Half of the participants filled out a questionnaire about their best friend, and the other half filled out a questionnaire about their mother.
Okay, and the results here are just incredibly revealing about how our brains construct reality.
They really are.
Because the group that filled out the questionnaire about their best friend gave Mark an average motivation rating of 5.56.
Basically a dead center, middle of the road rating.
Right, which aligns perfectly with the perfectly balanced neutral text.
But the group that answered questions about their mother rated Mark's motivation significantly higher.
Wait, let's isolate this variable for a second because the implications here are just staggering.
Yeah, let's highlight this.
The objective facts did not change at all. The text was completely identical for both groups. The cognitive load was identical. The only variable that changed was the specific emotional filter the person was wearing when they processed the text.
Yes. And to understand the neurological why behind this shift, we have to look at the deeply ingrained associations our brains carry.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, in a broad cultural sense, the concept of a mother is heavily intertwined with themes of striving for success, making her proud, duty, and intrinsic motivation.
Right, it's that classic societal narrative.
Exactly. So by simply engaging with questions about their mothers, the participants' brains activated the cognitive framework of motivation. That concept was brought to the very forefront of their working memory.
Oh, I see.
So when they subsequently encounter the ambiguous data about Mark, their brains, acting as cognitive misers, use that freshly activated framework of motivation to resolve the ambiguity of the text.
I always think about it like putting on a pair of heavily tinted glasses.
That's a great analogy.
Like if you put on rose-tinted glasses, you haven't fundamentally altered the molecular structure of the objects in the room.
Right, the room is the same.
The objective reality of the room is identical, but everything you look at takes on that specific hue. Your perception of the room is completely transformed by the lens.
That is an incredibly accurate way to model it. The objective data, Mark missing a morning class, takes on the tint of the activated lens.
So through the best friend lens, missing class might be seen as just being lazy or having a late night.
Exactly. But through the mother lens, which prioritizes a narrative of underlying motivation, missing class is written off as a minor stumble in an otherwise dedicated pursuit.
If you are an entrepreneur, a leader, or honestly anyone navigating high-stakes communication, you have to internalize the gravity of this mechanism.
It changes everything about how you communicate.
It really does. You could spend 3 weeks perfecting a business proposal. You could send the exact same PDF with the identical price and structure, the identical deliverables, and the exact same risk mitigation strategies.
Yes.
But the reality is that document will be interpreted in wildly different ways depending on the mindset the client happens to be in the second they open the email.
Absolutely.
Like if they just got out of a contentious board meeting, they have their skepticism glasses on. Your standard pricing looks exorbitant.
But if they just closed a major deal of their own, they have their optimism glasses on. Suddenly, your pricing looks like an investment in growth.
Right. So the objective data is at the mercy of the subjective lens.
And the crucial insight here is that we do not have to leave those glasses up to chance.
Okay, say more about that.
The environment dictates the mindset, and we have the agency to design the environment. We can systematically influence which lens our audience equips before we deliver our core message.
Okay, so if we accept that the brain uses these filters to process reality, the next logical question is, how are these filters actually constructed and stored in the brain? Like, where do these associations live?
In cognitive psychology, we refer to these stored structures as schemas.
Schemas, okay.
You can think of a schema as the brain's ultimate, highly interconnected filing system.
Like a mental filing cabinet?
Sort of, but much more web-like.
Yeah.
When you conceptualize a broad idea, let's say, a library, your brain does not just hold the dictionary definition of a building with books.
Right.
It holds a massive, intricate bundle of ideas, expected behaviors, physical feelings, and associations. The schema for a library contains the file for books, sure, but it also contains the files for whispering, studying, wood smells, and intellectual focus.
Ah, I see. So returning to the previous study, the schema for mother inherently contains the files for motivation and achievement.
Exactly. When the schema is accessed, all the associated files are pulled up with it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here is where it gets highly complex. Schemas don't just hold positive, useful associations. They also hold deeply ingrained societal stereotypes, cultural assumptions, and negative biases.
Oh, wow.
And activating these different schemas can measurably alter not just perception, but physical and cognitive performance.
Which leads us to one of the most compelling and I think heavily analyzed pieces of research in this space. The study conducted at Harvard University by Shi, Pitinsky, and Embody.
Yes, the math test study.
Right. They wanted to see what happens when a person holds two inherently conflicting schemas about their own identity and how activating one over the other affects their actual cognitive throughput.
It's a fascinating experimental design. They focused their study on Asian American women, specifically testing their performance on a rigorous quantitative math assessment. Sociologically, this specific demographic sits at the intersection of two very prominent conflicting cultural schemas in Western society.
Right, I see where this is going.
On one hand, there is a pervasive stereotype that Asians are highly proficient at mathematics. On the other hand, there is a conflicting historical stereotype that women are less proficient at mathematics than men.
And let's be very, very clear about the methodology here, because the researchers were absolutely not testing the validity of these stereotypes.
No, not at all. They are obviously broad, unfounded generalizations.
Exactly. What they were measuring was the neurological impact of the existence of these stereotypes as schemas within the brain.
Right, the fact that society planted them there.
Right, like what happens to actual measurable quantitative performance when the environment forces the brain to activate one of these schemas over the other.
To test this, the researchers divided the participants into groups right before administering the difficult math test. They gave them a pre-test survey, which was seemingly innocuous, but meticulously designed to activate a specific schema.
Okay, what kind of survey?
Well, one group was asked questions regarding their living situation specifically, whether their dorm floors were co-ed or single-sex.
The brilliance of that quadrant is its subtlety. It doesn't ask, are you a woman?
No, that would be too obvious.
It asks a logistical question about living arrangements that requires the participant to subtly bring their gender to the forefront of their working memory, effectively opening the female schema file.
Exactly. Conversely, another group was asked questions regarding their family heritage, the languages spoken in their household, and the geographic history of their grandparents.
Okay.
This survey was designed to subtly activate the Asian schema.
And I'm assuming there was a control group.
Yes, a third group, acting as the control, was asked completely neutral questions regarding their telecommunications usage, like phone plans and things like that.
Wow. And the results here, they fundamentally challenge how we view cognitive ability.
They really do.
Because the women who were exposed to the survey that activated the Asian schema performed significantly better on the math test than the neutral control group.
Right.
And the women who were exposed to the survey that activated the female schema performed significantly worse than the control group.
The drop in performance was highly significant.
But the biological brain taking the test didn't change. The inherent mathematical knowledge didn't change. The only thing that changed was the psychological framework that was booted up right before the test began.
It is a phenomenal demonstration of how our cognitive capacity is not a fixed asset. It fluctuates based on the active schema.
So it's dynamic.
Very dynamic. When the Asian schema was activated, the brain accessed the associated files of math proficiency and academic success, which bolstered confidence and reduced anxiety. That frees up cognitive resources to actually solve the equations.
Right.
But when the female schema was activated, it pulled up the associated societal file of math anxiety, which induced a micro level of cognitive dissonance and self-doubt. And that consumes the working memory needed for the test.
I want to push back on the implications here just a little bit because it feels incredibly fatalistic.
That's a fair reaction.
Like, does this imply that we are entirely at the mercy of the cultural programming we've absorbed? If an executive walks into a boardroom and feels that the environment is subtly activating a negative schema about their background or, say, their youth, are they neurologically doomed to underperform?
That is the most vital question we can ask when analyzing this data. And the answer is no, but we have to draw a hard line between belief and neurological association.
Okay, distinguish those for me.
The women in the Harvard study did not need to consciously believe that women are bad at math. They could be fierce advocates for women in STEM, completely rejecting the stereotype on a conscious level. But because they grew up in a society where that association exists, the neural pathway is physically present in their semantic network. When the environment triggers it, it exerts a gravitational pull on behavior.
That is so frustrating.
It is. But, however, this is not fatalistic. Because of metacognition, our ability to think about our own thinking.
Oh, okay. So awareness is the defense mechanism.
Exactly. When you are blind to the environmental cues, the schemas dictate the outcome. But once you understand how these invisible structures operate, you can consciously override them.
Right, you take the wheel back.
Exactly. If you walk into that boardroom and recognize, the structure of this room is activating a schema of intimidation, you move the process from the non-conscious automatic brain to the conscious analytical brain. You regain executive control.
And flipping that to the offensive side, as a leader designing an environment, this research requires you to ruthlessly audit the schemas that your business, your brand, or your physical presence naturally activates.
Yes. You have to ask yourself, what files are you opening in your client's brain just by the way your receptionist answers the phone or the dress code of your sales team?
Which naturally introduces the concept of the trigger mechanism itself. Because if a schema is the vast bundle of associations waiting to be deployed, how do we actually initiate that deployment without being completely overt?
Right, because you can't be obvious about it.
Practically speaking, you cannot hand a prospective client a questionnaire about their relationship with their mother before you pitch a new logistics software.
No. That would instantly break rapport. They'd look at you like you were crazy.
Exactly. So how do you do it?
Well, you don't need a formal survey. The trigger mechanism is known as priming. And priming is astonishingly sensitive. Mere incidental exposure to specific words, visual subtleties, or even ambient smells is enough to fully activate a complex schema.
Let's look at John Bargh's seminal work on priming, because it illustrates the physical power of these triggers in a really visceral way.
Oh, the walking study, yes?
Yeah. Bargh and his colleagues brought participants into a lab under the guise of a language proficiency test. They had participants unscramble sentences, just a basic word puzzle.
Right.
But the researchers seeded the puzzles with very specific vocabulary. They embedded words like bingo, wise, retired, Florida, and wrinkle.
Now, none of these words directly mention the concept of old age, but they are all strongly tethered to the schema of the elderly in the semantic network.
Exactly. But the puzzle was just a delivery system for the prime. The actual measurement took place after the participant believed the experiment was over.
This is the best part.
As the participants left the testing room, researchers secretly timed how long it took them to walk down the hallway to the elevators.
And what did they find?
They found that the participants who had unscrambled the elderly words literally walked down the hallway at a measurably slower pace than the control group.
This phenomenon is known as the ideomotor effect. The prime didn't just alter their thoughts. It bypassed the conscious brain entirely and directly altered their motor functions.
It's wild to think about.
Their physical bodies literally synchronized with the behavioral script associated with the elderly schema.
It is incredible. But let's elevate this from physical movement to high-level corporate strategy, because priming doesn't just make you walk slower, it dictates how creatively and analytically you can think.
And it can happen in a fraction of a second.
Right. Which brings us to a study by Fitzsimons, Chartrand, and Fitzsimons involving the visual priming of corporate logos.
This is a perfect example of subliminal environmental design.
Walk us through it.
The researchers placed participants in front of a screen and flashed logos at them. One group was exposed to the Apple logo, which, through decades of relentless marketing, carries a massive cultural schema of creativity, innovation, disruption, and thinking outside the box.
Right, the whole think different vibe.
Exactly. Another group was exposed to the IBM logo, which carries a schema of traditionalism, straightforward logic, corporate structure, and stability.
But the critical detail in the methodology here is the duration of the exposure. Because they did not just show them a picture of the logos and say, look at this.
No, they flashed the logos on the screen for exactly 13 milliseconds.
13 milliseconds.
That specific number, 13 milliseconds, is paramount. It is below the threshold of conscious visual perception. It is literally faster than the blink of an eye.
So if you ask the participants what they saw,
They will tell you they saw a brief flicker of light. The conscious analytical part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, simply cannot process an image at that speed.
which means the image bypasses the conscious filter completely and registers directly in the non-conscious mind.
Yes.
So after the subliminal exposure, they gave the participants a classic psychological test for creativity. They handed them a standard masonry brick and asked them to list as many unusual uses for it as they could think of.
Now, the standard answers are things like, a paperweight, a doorstop, maybe a weapon.
Right.
But the results of the study show that the group subliminally primed with the Apple logo not only generated a significantly higher volume of uses for the brick, but independent judges rated their ideas as objectively more creative and innovative than the ideas generated by the IBM primed group.
Let's really analyze the mechanics of this, because I find the thermostat analogy to be the most accurate way to understand it.
Oh, I love the thermostat analogy. Go ahead.
I look at environmental priming like setting the HVAC system in a room before you host a high-stakes negotiation.
Right.
You set the thermostat to a perfectly calibrated 71 degrees. When the opposing counsel walks into the room, they do not stop to examine the thermostat on the wall. They don't consciously think, the ambient temperature is optimal for my comfort.
No, they just feel comfortable.
Right. Their physiological stress drops, they take off their jackets, the environment dictates their physical and psychological state without them ever noticing the mechanism that produced it.
That analogy holds up perfectly under the psychological literature. The thermostat is the prime. And what the Apple versus IBM study proves is that the thermostat can be adjusted in 13 milliseconds entirely outside the awareness of the people in the room.
So the actionable application for anyone listening is to ruthlessly audit the 13-millisecond flashes that your environment provides.
Yes.
If a prospective client clicks on your website, what is the very first visual cue they see before they even read the headline? What is the color palette? What is the typography?
It all matters.
If they walk into your physical office, what is the layout of the waiting room? If you are a creative agency, does your lobby prime innovation with asymmetrical design and vibrant art, or does it prime bureaucracy with beige walls and sterile fluorescent lighting?
Every single element in your environment is pulling a cognitive string. You have to ensure they're pulling in the direction of the mindset you want to establish.
And to truly engineer this process intentionally, we have to look at the neurobiology that makes this all possible.
Yes, we need to explain the concept of spreading activation.
This is the perfect moment to return to our hook, the lucky dwarf.
Ah, yes.
Let's fully dissect why almost everyone listening to this had the number 7 aggressively pushed to the front of their conscious mind. How did that physically happen in the brain?
It requires visualizing how the brain stores data. The brain does not store information like a traditional computer hard drive in isolated, compartmentalized folders.
Okay.
It stores information in a semantic network, which is best visualized as a massive, intricate, three-dimensional spider web. Every single concept you have ever learned, every word, every image, every memory, every emotion is a node on that web.
A node. Got it.
And these nodes are physically connected by neural pathways to other related nodes.
So the node representing the concept of fire is directly linked to the node for heat, which is linked to red, which is linked to danger, and so on.
Correct. And the fundamental rule of this network is that when a node is activated, say you read the word fire, the electrical and chemical activation does not just stay contained within that single node.
It travels.
It physically travels down the neural pathways and partially activates all the neighboring nodes. It is exactly like dropping a stone into a still pond. The ripples spread outward in all directions. This physiological ripple effect is what we call spreading activation.
Okay, so mapping this onto the cognitive exercise we opened with. The number 7 is a node in your semantic network.
Yeah.
And for the vast majority of people raised in Western cultural paradigms, that specific node has very strong, heavily reinforced neural pathways connecting it to 2 other distinct concepts. First, the ubiquitous cultural phrase, lucky number 7.
Right.
And second, the deeply ingrained fairy tale, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs.
Therefore, when we asked you to visualize a lucky dwarf, we were essentially dropping 2 distinct stones into opposite sides of your semantic pond. We forcefully activated the luck node, and we simultaneously activated the dwarf node.
And as the activation ripples spread outward from both of those nodes through your brain's web, they follow the paths of least resistance, the strongest associations.
And where do those 2 sets of ripples intersect?
They collide perfectly at the node for the number 7.
Exactly. Because of that intersection, the node for the number 7 receives a double dose of activation energy.
Wow.
By the time we hit you with a time pressure saying, quick, pick a number, your conscious analytical brain doesn't have the milliseconds required to genuinely evaluate the numbers 1 through 10. It defaults to the node that is already burning the brightest in your non-conscious network.
So 7 is the most readily available answer, so your brain grabs it and serves it up as an independent choice.
That's it, exactly.
That is just a masterful breakdown of the neurobiology. And the strategic takeaway for Persuasion is profound.
It really is.
Because if you want to compel someone to think of a specific idea or arrive at a specific conclusion, directly stating that conclusion is often the least effective method.
Right, because direct statements often trigger psychological reactance.
Yeah, the target feels they are being sold to, and they raise their defensive shields.
We all do it.
Instead, the most sophisticated persuaders use spreading activation. They simply activate the nodes connected to the target idea. They construct an environment of primes and allow the target's own neural architecture to naturally spread the activation until the target arrives at the intended conclusion on their own.
It is the ultimate form of influence because it bypasses resistance. People rarely argue with their own conclusions.
That is such a powerful phrase. People rarely argue with their own conclusions.
Which brings us to the operational phase. How do we actually deploy spreading activation and priming in our day-to-day professional lives? How do we prime perception intentionally?
Let's dive into practical strategy, because a massive error in negotiation or sales is the cold open. Walking into a room, sitting down, and immediately launching into the pitch.
The worst thing you can do.
Kolenda's work makes it abundantly clear that you must first prime the target's perception.
To illustrate why the cold open fails, consider a negative example from media placement. There is a concept in psychology called the affect infusion model, which basically dictates that our current emotional state heavily influences our cognitive judgments.
Okay.
Imagine you're watching a highly dramatic, emotionally taxing television show, like Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, this will be good.
The episode reaches its climax right before a commercial break. A beloved character has just received a devastating terminal diagnosis. The music swells with tragedy, characters are weeping, the thematic weight of mortality is heavy, and the screen cuts to black.
Man, commercial break.
Exactly. Now imagine you are a media buyer for a travel agency, and you purchase the very first commercial slot in that break. Your ad is a vibrant, high-energy, joyful montage of a family vacationing at a tropical theme park. Pop music is blaring, kids are laughing.
Oh, no.
What happens to the efficacy of your ad?
It creates massive cognitive whiplash. It feels tone-deaf, jarring, and honestly almost offensive.
Precisely, because the preceding scene flooded the semantic network with nodes related to grief, loss, and seriousness.
Yeah.
The viewers are processing your joyful commercial through an active lens of tragedy.
The prime of the television show completely destroyed the intended perception of the marketing message.
Yes.
So, knowing how easily a prime can derail a message, how do we actively construct a positive prime before a high-stakes conversation? Let's say you are pitching a completely novel, highly unorthodox business model to a conservative investor.
Okay, good scenario.
If they view it through their standard lens of risk aversion, you are dead in the water. You need to prime their semantic network for open-mindedness.
The research by Rand Hassan in 2008 demonstrates that mere exposure to vocabulary related to open-mindedness measurably increases cognitive flexibility.
Really, just the words.
Just the words. Simply weaving words like elastic, adaptable, flexible, or versatile into your initial greetings can begin to activate those nodes.
But the strategy gets much more elegant when you script pre-conversation. This is the seemingly idle small talk that occurs as you are pouring coffee or walking from the lobby to the conference room.
Right, the banter.
You can casually introduce a narrative that primes the exact mindset you need. For example, you might say, on the drive over here, I was listening to the new Mumford & Sons album. I actually couldn't stand their style at first, but I decided to keep an open mind, gave it a few more listens, and I've completely changed my tune. It's brilliant.
Or you utilize a brief anecdote about stepping outside of a comfort zone. Discussing a friend who is terrified of heights but finally tried skydiving and loved it. Or even something as mundane as trying a vegetable you notoriously hated, like eggplant, and discovering it was prepared wonderfully at a new restaurant.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here.
Please do.
Because if I am a seasoned venture capitalist and a founder sits down in my office and starts spontaneously monologuing about how much they suddenly love eggplant, my analytical brain is going to throw a red flag. I'm going to think, why is this person dodging the pitch? Are they nervous? Is this a delay tactic? How does this not backfire entirely?
That is a highly astute critique, and it highlights the most critical nuance of conversational priming. Congruency.
Congruency.
The prime must be organically embedded in the environment. You cannot read a scripted anecdote like a robot. It must flow naturally from the context of the situation.
So it has to fit the moment.
Right. If you're asked about your weekend, that is the organic entry point. Oh, I went to this great new Mediterranean place. I'm usually pretty rigid about my order, but I decided to keep an open mind and try the eggplant.
Ah, I see.
The goal is absolutely not trickery. You are not trying to hypnotize them with a vegetable. You're simply utilizing natural conversational bridges to gently stimulate the neural nodes associated with flexibility, altering the ambient temperature of their cognition so they are more receptive to an unorthodox pitch.
It's about reducing the friction. And this strategic placement works incredibly well in print and digital media too. Kolenda highlights a brilliant strategy regarding the halo effect and schema transfer in advertising.
Oh, the magazine ad example.
Yeah. If you are an independent author looking to buy ad space in a major publication, the placement of that ad is far more important than the copy itself. You research the magazine's layout and find out where they are running an interview with a globally recognized best-selling author.
Okay.
And then you purchase the ad space on the page immediately following that interview.
It is a masterclass in threading activation. As the target audience reads the interview, their brain is fully activating the schema for prestigious, high-quality, must-read literature. That note is burning bright.
Yes.
When they turn the page and immediately encounter your ad, Their non-conscious perception evaluates your unknown book through the lingering glow of the bestseller lens. You are effectively borrowing the cognitive real estate of the activated schema.
So the overarching practical takeaway for perception priming is to fiercely protect and engineer the pre-conversation. The 5 minutes of small talk before the slide deck is opened is not a polite formality. It is the most structurally critical phase of the persuasion process. It is where you build the lens.
And Kolenda's research takes this even further. We've established that you can prime how people process information. But the data shows you can also prime how people physically behave in a space. You can prime action.
This moves us into a fascinating series of behavioral priming studies. Let's really break down the methodology of a few of these, starting with the politeness study because it shows how language alters physical restraint.
In this study, participants were divided and given another scrambled sentence task. One group's task was seeded with vocabulary related to politeness, words like respect, honor, patient, and considerate.
And the other group?
The other group was seeded with words related to rudeness, interrupt, bold, aggressive. After completing the task, the participants were instructed to walk down the hall to the experimenter's office to get their next assignment.
But the setup was a trap.
Exactly. When the participant arrived, the experimenter was engaged in a seemingly endless staged conversation with an actor, completely ignoring the participant.
Just totally blowing them off.
The researchers were measuring the exact time it took for the participant to physically interrupt the conversation.
And the results?
The results were staggering. The vast majority of their participants primed with the rude words interrupted the conversation within a few minutes. However, a significant portion of the participants primed with the polite words never interrupted at all.
Wow.
They waited the entire 10-minute maximum time limit. The prime physically suppressed their vocal action and behavioral assertiveness.
It literally engineered patience. Now, what about the cleanliness study? Because this one moves away from linguistics and into olfactory priming. Smells.
Smell is deeply tied to the amygdala and the hippocampus, making it a powerful behavioral prime. Researchers brought participants into a room to complete a task. For one group, the researchers pumped an incredibly faint scent of a citrus-based all-purpose cleaner into the air.
Faint, meaning they couldn't actively smell it.
Right. It was subliminal, not strong enough for participants to consciously remark on it.
Yeah.
Just a trace element in the environment.
And then the participants were given crumbly biscuits to eat while working.
Exactly. And the researchers observed their unconscious eating habits. The participants in the room with the faint citrus scent unconsciously engaged in significantly more cleaning behaviors.
Like what?
They wiped their mouths more often, they brushed crumbs off their desks meticulously, and they kept their workspace far more organized than the control group in an unscented room.
Unbelievable.
The olfactory cue bypassed the conscious brain, activated the schema for cleanliness, and initiated the associated motor functions.
This is why retail stores pump specific scents into their HVAC systems. It's not just to smell nice, it's to trigger specific behavioral scripts. And this connects perfectly to the study regarding guilt and consumer behavior.
Right. In this study, participants were primed with vocabulary associated with guilt, words like sin, remorse, and mistake. Later in the experiment, they were given the opportunity to purchase various items. The data show that the individuals exposed to the guilt primes were significantly more likely to purchase candy and sweets than the control group.
Let's analyze the mechanism there because it's a form of hedonic compensation, isn't it?
Precisely. In our cultural schema, candy is heavily associated with the concept of a guilty pleasure or a minor indulgence. By activating the feeling of guilt, the brain naturally sought out a behavioral action that aligned with and resolved that specific emotional state.
So the feeling drove the physical purchasing decision.
Exactly.
How do we apply this behavioral programming in a leadership context? Say I'm a manager trying to regulate the energy of a chaotic department, or a teacher dealing with a rowdy classroom.
Kolenda provides a remarkably simple and effective architectural example. If a teacher wants a classroom to be quiet, constantly shouting, "Be quiet," creates an adversarial dynamic and triggers resistance.
Yeah, kids just push back.
Instead, you modify the visual environment. You place a large, highly detailed, prominent picture of a traditional library on the wall.
Just a picture.
Just a picture. The visual cue of the library non-consciously activates the schema for a library in the student's brains.
Yeah.
And what is the primary behavioral script associated with a library? Silence. The environment does the heavy lifting of behavioral regulation.
It's utilizing environmental design as a tool for behavioral alignment. I also want to touch on the perspective Kolenda brings from his background as a stage mentalist.
Oh, this is fascinating.
He explicitly states that mind readers do not possess supernatural abilities. They are simply elite practitioners of behavioral and cognitive priming. They prime thought so aggressively that the subject is convinced the thought originated organically. Let's look at the carrot example.
If a mentalist wants to force a subject to choose the word carrot, they do not explicitly command it. They build a conversational environment that bombards the semantic network with related nodes. During their patter, they might casually mention working in a garden. They might wear an orange tie. They might use the word crunch when describing a situation. They might even execute a subtle nonverbal hand gesture that mimics pulling something from the ground or a slight chewing motion.
They are dropping dozens of pebbles into the semantic pond, and all the ripples are converging on the carrot node.
Exactly. And then comes the crucial psychological mechanism, time pressure.
The time pressure again?
The time pressure is the linchpin of the illusion. If the mentalist says, take your time, think of any vegetable, the subject's prefrontal cortex engages. The conscious brain might detect the pattern, realize they're being nudged toward a carrot, and deliberately choose asparagus just to assert their independence.
Right, spite.
But if the mentalist snaps their fingers and says, quick, name a vegetable right now, the analytical brain is bypassed. The non-conscious mind instinctively reaches for the node with the highest electrical activation. And because of the environmental design, that node is the carrot.
The subject says it, and the mentalist appears to have read their mind.
It's all priming.
If we synthesize all of this from the Fitzsimons and Bark studies to the subliminal logos to the mentalist techniques, what it conclusively demonstrates is that human behavior and cognitive processing are extraordinarily malleable.
Highly malleable.
We deeply cherish the narrative of ourselves as highly rational, independent actors making entirely autonomous choices. But the empirical reality is that our non-conscious brain is a radar system, constantly scanning the physical, conversational, and visual environment for cues on how to perceive reality and how to act within it.
So the immediate actionable takeaway for behavioral priming is to conduct a rigorous audit of the physical spaces you control.
Yes.
Look at your office, your storefront, or even your living room through the lens of a cognitive architect. If you manage a team and you are frustrated by a lack of collaboration, look at the physical layout. Does your space prime connection with circular tables, warm lighting, and shared resources?
Or is it a grid of high-walled, sterile cubicles that aggressively primes isolation and territorialism?
Exactly. If you run a creative firm, does your conference room prime divergent thinking, or does it look like a rigid, bureaucratic interrogation room? You are not just interior decorating, you are literally programming the behavioral scripts of every human being who crosses the threshold.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. We have covered a massive expanse of cognitive architecture today.
We really have.
We started with the foundational concept that mindsets act as subjective lenses filtering objective reality. We explored how those lenses are stored as complex schemas and how those schemas can dictate cognitive performance, as seen in the Harvard math studies.
We broke down the 13-millisecond threshold of subliminal priming.
Right. And we mapped the physical neurobiology of spreading activation through the semantic network and outlined highly specific real-world strategies for scripting pre-conversations and designing behavioral environments.
If we distill all of this data, all of these studies, down to one synthesized core insight that represents the absolute soul of Kolenda's framework, it is this. True, masterful persuasion is fundamentally environmental.
Environmental.
By the time you actually open your mouth to make the formal request, whether you are asking for $1 million investment, a promotion, or a behavior change from your team, the actual decision has very often already been made.
Wow.
It has been made by the specific schemas you activated, the subtle primes you embedded in the space, and the spreading activation that took place in the minds of your audience in the minutes and hours beforehand. You are not simply communicating a message. You are constructing the psychological reality in which your message is received.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It moves you from being a communicator to being an architect. You are setting the cognitive stage so meticulously that the only logical, frictionless conclusion for the audience is to agree with your premise.
Exactly. When you control the environment, you control the lens. And when you control the lens, the persuasion happens organically.
Which brings us back to the uncomfortable tension we started with. The idea that our thoughts are guided by the environment can feel unnerving at first.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But once you understand the mechanics, once you see the strings, it becomes an incredibly empowering tool for both influence and self-awareness. So I want to leave you with a provocative concept to analyze in your own life today.
What is it?
The next time you walk into a retail store, sit down in a corporate meeting room, or even just relax in your own living room, stop for a second. Look around at the architecture, the lighting, the colors, and the subtle cues, and ask yourself, what is this room silently commanding my brain to do? What specific psychological glasses has this environment forced me to put on?
Once you train your brain to spot the environmental primes, the invisible architecture of the world becomes entirely visible.
It fundamentally changes how you interact with the world around you. But altering the mindset is only the very first pillar in the architecture of influence.
Just the beginning.
Wait until you discover how a completely random, mathematically meaningless number can bypass your rational defenses and dictate exactly how much you are willing to pay for a product. We are going to deconstruct the mechanics of anchoring in our next deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible architecture of your environment, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
I have three highly specific rapid-fire questions for you.
Yeah.
And I want you to just instinctively answer them in your head as fast as humanly possible.
Okay, we're ready.
All right, here we go. First, is the average temperature in San Francisco greater or less than 558 degrees Fahrenheit? Second, was the number of Beatles records that made the top 10 greater or fewer than 100,025?
Okay.
Third, is the average price of a college textbook greater or less than $7,128.53?
I mean, if you just walked up to me on the street and asked those, my immediate reaction would obviously be, less, fewer, and less.
Right.
But just hearing you list those numbers out loud, I can already feel my brain, struggling to process the sheer absurdity of 558 degrees. Unless we relocated San Francisco to the surface of Venus, it's a totally ridiculous proposition.
It is, yeah, entirely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yet, simply by throwing those absurd, totally fabricated numbers into the air, I have already neurologically hijacked your brain.
Yeah, you have.
Even though your conscious mind completely rejects 558 degrees as a factual impossibility.
Yeah.
The actual final estimates you are forming in your head right now for the real temperature, the real number of records, the real price of that textbook, they are dramatically higher than they would have been if I had never mentioned those numbers at all.
It's one of the most persistent and, frankly, unnerving glitches in human cognition. We really like to think of our minds as these impermeable fortresses of logic.
Right, that we're totally rational.
Exactly. But in reality, we are entirely tethered to whatever random information we are exposed to first. Even when we know for an absolute fact that the information is garbage, it still skews our perception of reality.
And that cognitive glitch, that is exactly the territory we are mapping out today. We are opening up a stack of notes, research papers, and excerpts surrounding Nick Kolenda's book, Methods of Persuasion.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're placing our focus squarely on Chapter 2.
Which is arguably, the most foundational chapter if you really want to understand how human valuation actually works. We are looking at a psychological phenomenon known as the anchoring effect.
Yeah, so to give you a roadmap of what we're doing here in this deep dive, we are going to explore the precise neurological and psychological mechanisms that cause the human brain to cling to completely irrelevant numbers and concepts when making judgments.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is, because for anyone interested in business, entrepreneurship, negotiation, or honestly, just recognizing when your own mind is being played, mastering the mechanics of the anchoring effect is essentially a superpower.
Oh, absolutely.
It is the invisible force that allows you to frame high-stakes negotiations, price products effectively, and shape how other people perceive the world around them.
The anchoring effect is one of those concepts that once you fully grasp the machinery behind it, you just start seeing it everywhere.
Oh yeah, you can't unsee it.
Right. You'll notice it in the initial offer at a car dealership, the layout of a restaurant menu, the opening bid in a salary negotiation.
Definitely.
The phenomenon was actually brought into the mainstream by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman during their groundbreaking work on heuristics and biases back in the 1970s.
Right.
And their research demonstrated that humans just don't make judgments in a vacuum. Instead, we evaluate things by measuring their relative distance from an initial starting point, an anchor.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because I want to push back on the standard interpretation of this. On the surface, the Kahneman to Tversky explanation almost sounds like a polite way of saying people are just gullible.
I can see why it sounds like that.
Right, like if I tell you a textbook costs $7,000 and that somehow tricks you into guessing it costs $200 instead of $80, are we just dealing with a lack of critical thinking? Or is there a deeper, like mechanical reason this is happening at a structural level in the brain?
It is absolutely not just gullibility. And honestly, framing it as a lack of intelligence completely misses the underlying biology of how we process information.
Okay.
It is a highly mechanical, non-conscious process. The brain relies on this system because evaluating every single piece of information from scratch requires an immense amount of cognitive energy.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. To save those cognitive calories, the brain uses shortcuts. And anchoring operates primarily through two distinct physiological and psychological pathways. The first is priming.
Right, which goes back to the absurd questions from the beginning of the deep dive.
Exactly. When you suggested 558 degrees Fahrenheit for San Francisco, you didn't just transmit a piece of numerical data. The human brain is an associative machine.
Right.
To even comprehend the sentence you just spoke, my brain had to involuntarily activate a semantic network related to extreme heat.
Oh.
I literally had to visualize a scorching, apocalyptic environment just to parse the grammar of your question. When you suggested a $7,000 textbook, you forced the listener's brain to retrieve mental images of massive, leather-bound, incredibly rare medical or law encyclopedias.
So the brain is essentially auto-filling the context to make the absurd number logically coherent. And in doing so, it just changes the whole baseline environment of the thought process.
That's the precise mechanism, yeah. Your brain attempts to make sense of the anchor by activating schemas, these clusters of related concepts that are consistent with that high number.
Got it.
Once those high-value or high-intensity schemas are activated, they exert this magnetic pull. The activation spreads through your neural pathways, meaning when you finally go to make your actual reasonable guess, you are drawing from a pool of heightened, elevated mental images.
You guess higher because your brain is currently marinating in high-value concepts.
Marinating is a perfect word for it, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense for the visual and semantic side of it.
Yeah.
But what happens when the anchor doesn't naturally evoke a vivid image? Like, what is the second pathway?
So the second pathway is known as the adjustment heuristic. This comes into play much more directly with mental math and logical deduction.
Okay.
When we are forced to make an estimate about something we don't know, we don't just pull a number out of thin air. We start at the provided anchor, even if we consciously acknowledge it is completely incorrect, and we use it as our geographic center. We then mentally adjust downward or upward from there.
It's sort of like trying to throw a dart at a dartboard while blindfolded.
Ooh, I like that.
Right, so before you throw, someone walks up and taps the wall 3 feet to the right of the board.
Yeah.
You know they are messing with you. You know the center of the board is definitely not over there.
Yeah.
But because that tap is literally the only sensory input you have in a void of information, you naturally aim your throw closer to the sound than you would have otherwise.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The tap on the wall provides a spatial anchor when you lack visual data, just as a numerical anchor provides a quantitative center when you lack factual data.
Exactly.
You start at the tap, and you mentally adjust to the left. You think, okay, 558 degrees is way too high, 400 is too high, 200 is too high, 100 maybe.
Right.
You adjust away from the anchor until you reach a number that crosses the threshold of plausibility, and then you just stop.
But because I started at such an extreme edge, the point where I stop adjusting is still heavily skewed toward the starting point.
Precisely. Because cognitive adjustment requires working memory and active focus. What Kahneman would call System 2 thinking, it is tiring.
It takes effort.
It takes a lot of effort. Your brain wants to stop adjusting as soon as possible. So you stop at the very first number that feels remotely acceptable. And the practical takeaway here is arguably the most important rule of negotiation. In any conversation, any sales pitch, any debate over value, the very first number or concept introduced into the room permanently alters the topography of the negotiation.
It just sets the whole board.
Exactly. It does not matter who says it. It does not matter if it is an extreme aggressive number. Whoever drops the first anchor is the one tapping the wall. They dictate the exact coordinates where the mental adjustment begins.
I mean, I understand the mechanics of the adjustment heuristic, but I just have a hard time accepting that conscious awareness can't override it.
It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure.
Right, like if I know the psychology of anchoring and I walk into a car dealership and the salesperson taps the wall 3 feet to the right by offering an absurdly high price, why can't I just consciously reject the anchor and force myself to aim perfectly straight?
You'd think you could, right?
Yeah, If I know the trick, shouldn't I be immune to the trick?
It is deeply counterintuitive, but the research overwhelmingly demonstrates that conscious awareness offers almost zero protection against the anchoring effect. Knowing about an anchor does not immunize you against its gravity.
I really struggle to buy that entirely. If someone explicitly warned me, hey, I'm about to give you a fake number to mess with your guess, I would just actively ignore the number.
That exact premise was tested in a famous, highly rigorous study by Timothy Wilson and his colleagues back in 1996.
Okay, what did they do?
They wanted to see if they could fortify people against the anchoring effect through explicit warnings and financial incentives. So they brought participants into a lab and asked them to estimate the number of physicians listed in a local regional phone book.
An obscure enough trivia question that literally no one would know the exact answer, forcing them to estimate.
Exactly. But before the participants made their guess, they were given an arbitrary, completely random 4-digit ID number.
Okay.
They were told to just hold this ID number in their working memory for a moment.
So the 4-digit ID number is acting as the covert anchor.
Yes. But here's where Wilson elevated the study. The researchers didn't just sneak the anchor in, they explicitly warned the participants about the psychological contamination effect of numbers.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They told them, completely point blank, quote, "A number in people's heads can influence their answers to subsequent questions. Please be careful not to let this happen to you. We want your most accurate estimate."
Wow, so they explained the exact cognitive bias to the participants before the test.
They spelled out the danger entirely. And to ensure that the participants weren't just being mentally lazy, the researchers introduced a strong external motivation.
A bribe.
Basically, they offered a $50 cash prize to the person who provided the most accurate estimate.
Okay, so let's look at the variables here. The participants have theoretical knowledge of the trap, they have explicit instructions from the researchers to avoid the trap, and they have a tangible financial incentive to bypass the trap.
Right.
If conscious willpower works, this is the environment where it should totally triumph.
And yet, the warning and the money were statistically useless.
No way.
The arbitrary ID number still dictated the final estimates. The participants who were handed high 4-digit ID numbers guessed there were far more physicians in the phone book than the participants who were handed low ID numbers.
That is wild.
The anchor bypassed their conscious defenses, it bypassed the explicit warning, and bypassed their desire for the $50.
Mechanically, how is that even possible? Why couldn't they just, drop the 4-digit number from their working memory?
Because of how the human brain parses instructions. To actively avoid thinking about a number, you have to keep that number active in your working memory to monitor whether or not you are thinking about it.
Oh, right.
It's the classic don't think of a pink elephant problem. By consciously trying to suppress the anger, you are continuously reactivating the neural pathways associated with that number, inadvertently strengthening the priming effect.
It backfired.
Entirely. Your non-conscious processing system 1 is simply faster and more deeply embedded than your conscious rational system 2 willpower.
That is really unsettling, especially when you apply it outside of, guessing phone book trivia. Let's talk about ecological validity.
Sure.
Does this hold up in real-world environments where the stakes aren't a $50 prize, but someone's actual life or livelihood?
It does, and honestly, the data is highly concerning. The book details a study involving seasoned legal professionals, judges, and prosecutors with decades of experience in the criminal justice system.
Okay.
These are individuals whose entire careers are built on objective evaluation and dismissing irrelevant information. They were presented with a hypothetical, yet highly detailed, case file about a shoplifter and asked to determine the appropriate length of the prison sentence.
So these aren't college sophomores in a lab. These are experts trained to filter out bias.
Right. Before the judges wrote down their sentence, they were given a recommended sentence length by a prosecutor. But the researchers made it abundantly clear that this recommended length was completely random.
How so?
To remove any shadow of a doubt about its randomness, the sentence recommendation was determined right in front of the judges by rolling a pair of dice.
Wait, hold on. I need to challenge the premise of this study design.
Go for it.
You are telling me that highly educated judges watch someone roll a pair of literal dice to determine a prison sentence, and they went along with it. Is it possible the judges assumed the dice were loaded, or that the quote-unquote random roll was actually a subtle back-channel suggestion from the researchers, so they just played along out of social compliance?
It is a totally fair critique of lab-based behavioral economics, but the researchers actually controlled for demand characteristics. The
Yeah.
judges knew it was an exercise in decision-making under uncertainty, and they knew the dice were standard.
Okay.
Yet, despite knowing for an absolute empirical fact that the anchor number was generated by plastic cubes bouncing on a table, the experienced judges were still helplessly tethered to it.
Are you
Mm.
serious?
Completely. The judges who watched the dice land on a high number handed down sentences that were significantly longer, sometimes spanning several additional months or even years, than the judges who watched the dice land on a low number.
Years. Years of a hypothetical human being's life, added or subtracted based entirely on a random dice roll, despite the judge possessing full conscious awareness that it was random.
It's terrifying, but it demonstrates that expertise, professional experience, and conscious awareness are structurally insufficient to break the invisible tether of the anchor. The brain fundamentally cannot unsee a number once it has been processed.
The application for the listener here is incredibly urgent. You cannot simply trust yourself or trust the experts across the table from you to objectively just ignore a bad initial offer.
You really can't.
If you are selling a business and a competitor lowballs you with an insulting, absurd valuation, you cannot just laugh it off, walk out of the room, and assume your internal valuation is safe. It isn't.
No, it's already compromised.
The anchor has already infiltrated your cognitive baseline. It is actively dragging your perception of your own company's value down into the dirt. You cannot rely on sheer willpower to ignore their number. You must actively and aggressively introduce a counter-anchor to reset the geographic center of the negotiation.
That is the only defense. You have to fight a prime with a prime. You have to force their brain and your own to recalibrate around an entirely new set of data points.
But this leads to a massive evolutionary question for me. If this anchoring mechanism is so deeply flawed that it leads experienced judges to give out randomized prison sentences, why did we evolve this way?
That's a great question.
It just seems like a catastrophic glitch in our operating system. Why does the brain actively stutter for these anchors?
Well, to understand why it survived the evolutionary bottleneck, you have to look at the tension between two competing mandates in the human brain: the desperate desire for accuracy and the biological necessity of mental laziness or, cognitive caloric preservation.
Accuracy versus cognitive preservation. Okay, let's break down the accuracy side first. How does anchoring serve our need to be correct?
When we are faced with a novel environment or an unknown variable, our brain panics slightly. We want to be accurate to survive.
Makes sense.
If the environment does not provide an external anchor for us, we won't just guess blindly. We will actually manufacture our own anchor just so we have a reliable starting point. In psychology, these are called self-generated anchors.
Okay.
Kolenda's text uses a brilliant, everyday example for this, estimating the freezing point of vodka.
Okay, I have vodka in my freezer. It gets incredibly cold. It becomes viscous, but it doesn't freeze into a solid block of ice. However, if you ask me the exact temperature at which it finally freezes, I realize I have absolutely no idea.
Right, most people don't possess that specific trivia, but your brain still wants to give me an accurate, intelligent answer. So your System 1 processing instantly scans your memory banks for the closest verified fact it can find to act as a proxy. What is the freezing point of water?
0 degrees Celsius,
Yeah.
or 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Your brain immediately anchors to the freezing point of water because it is verified, accurate data.
Right.
You know vodka contains a high volume of alcohol, and you know alcohol lowers the freezing point of a liquid. So you establish 0 degrees Celsius as your self-generated anchor, and you begin to mentally adjust downward into the negatives. You create an anchor in a good faith pursuit of accuracy.
That makes perfect logical sense. It's an evolutionary adaptation to deal with uncertainty by tethering to the known. But where does the mental laziness, the caloric preservation, come in to ruin the process?
The preservation mandate kicks in during the adjustment phase. As we discussed earlier, mental math is exhausting. Adjusting away from an anchor requires System 2 focus, which literally burns glucose in the brain.
And the brain is lazy.
The brain is an energy hoarding organ, yeah. It wants to stop adjusting the exact microsecond it crosses the threshold into a logically acceptable answer. This is known as the plausible outcome reached effect.
So we don't adjust until we find the most accurate answer. We adjust until we find the absolute bare minimum acceptable answer.
Precisely. Let's look at how Kolenda frames this. If I ask you to estimate the exact percentage likelihood that you will buy a specific new book coming out next month, you are not going to calculate a highly specific, granular number like 63.7%.
No, of course not.
Human beings don't think in exact probabilities. Instead, your brain generates what cognitive psychologists call a fuzzy set or a plausible range. Let's say your true internal feeling is a range somewhere between 50% and 70%.
Okay, I have my acceptable fuzzy range, 50 to 70%.
Now, what if I subtly introduce a high anchor? What if I ask, is the likelihood you buy this book greater or less than 90%?
Okay.
You start at the 90% anchor and you begin the exhausting process of adjusting downward.
Yeah.
95. The moment you hit 70%, which is the absolute very top ceiling of your acceptable range, your brain effectively says, good enough, we have reached plausibility.
And it just quits.
It shuts down the adjustment process to save energy. You settle on an estimate of 70%.
And if the scenario is reversed, like if you anchored me low by asking, is the likelihood greater or less than 10%?
The exact same mechanical laziness applies, just in the opposite direction. You start at 10 and adjust upward. 10, 20, 30. The moment you hit 50%, the rock bottom floor of your acceptable range, your brain stops the calculation.
You settle at 50%.
Yep. In both scenarios, you were cognitively lazy. You never did the hard work to find the true, objective middle of your desire. You simply surrendered at the very first acceptable number you bumped into.
Applying this to a real-world scenario fundamentally changes how you view negotiations. Let's talk about the listener walking into a high-stakes job interview.
Oh, this is the perfect application.
The hiring manager asks for your desired salary. Before you even answer, you have generated a self-anchor based on your research of the industry average, and you have formulated a fuzzy, plausible range of what you will accept to survive and feel valued.
Right.
If the employer speaks first and throws out a lowball number, you are forced to start adjusting from their low anchor upward, and you will inevitably stop advocating for yourself the exact second the negotiation hits the absolute bottom edge of your comfort zone.
Yes, and that is why whoever speaks first wins the negotiation. For employers and employees alike, deeply internalizing the plausible outcome reached concept means recognizing that human beings will stop negotiating the exact second they hit the boundary of their acceptable range.
That's incredible.
If you anchor high, they adjust down and stop at their maximum boundary. If you anchor low, they adjust up and stop at their minimum boundary.
It is brilliant and slightly terrifying because we don't even realize we are stopping early. We just feel like we compromise fairly.
And the brain actually tricks itself into feeling confident about that early stop through another evolutionary shortcut, the availability heuristic.
What's that?
This is the brain's tendency to evaluate how accurate or likely something is based entirely on how easily an example comes to mind. It's what psychologists call processing fluency.
What is the evolutionary basis for that? Why would ease of memory equal truth?
Imagine our ancestors on the savannah. If you are trying to decide if a specific watering hole is dangerous and you can instantly, effortlessly recall a vivid memory of a tiger attacking someone there, that ease of recall is a highly accurate proxy for danger.
Okay, that makes sense.
Processing fluency meant survival. If it is easy to remember, it must be common and it must be true.
But how does that ancient survival mechanism misfire when dealing with modern anchors?
Let's look back at the experienced judge handing down a 5-year sentence based on a random dice roll. Why did the judge's brain feel comfortable stopping at 5 years? Why did 5 years feel correct?
Yeah, why?
Because when the anchor of 5 years was introduced by the dice, the judge's system 1 rapidly scanned its massive internal database of legal precedent for any case that resulted in a 5-year sentence. Because 5 years is a standard round number in the legal system, a memory of a 5-year sentence popped up instantly.
And because the memory retrieval was effortless high processing fluency, the brain conflated that ease with accuracy.
Exactly. The brain falsely validated the randomized anchor. It essentially said, oh, I remembered a 5-year sentence without any cognitive strain, therefore 5 years must be a highly appropriate, standard, and accurate sentence for this specific crime.
Wow.
The brain used its own efficiency to trick itself into believing a random dice roll was a measured legal judgment.
That perfectly bridges the gap between the what and the why. But I want to introduce a major theoretical pivot here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Everything we have discussed so far, the textbook, the temperatures, the salary, the prison sentences, is all involved adjusting toward the anchor. If you drop a high anchor, I get pulled high. If you drop a low anchor, I get pulled low.
Right.
Is that an immutable law of physics in the brain? Do we always assimilate toward the gravitational pull of the anchor?
It is a critical distinction to make, and the answer is absolutely not. We do not always adjust toward the anchor. Under specific conditions, we adjust violently and completely away from it.
Really?
Yeah. In cognitive psychology, adjusting toward an anchor is called assimilation. As you noted, assimilation is the default mechanism when we are dealing with purely numeric anchors, like guessing the price of a textbook or whether Gandhi lived to be 140 years old.
Right.
But when we transition away from raw numbers and begin dealing with semantic categories, ideas, qualitative concepts, physical traits, or emotional weights, we frequently trigger what is known as a contrast effect.
A contrast effect.
Yeah.
How does the mechanism shift when we move from numbers to concepts?
The easiest way to grasp this is through the visual cortex. Have you ever looked at the Ebbinghaus illusion?
I am familiar with the visual principle, but describe how it maps onto this theory.
So for the listener, I want you to perform a quick visualization exercise. Imagine two identical circles resting on a page, Circle A and Circle B. They have the exact same circumference. They are visually identical. Now imagine Circle A is suddenly surrounded by a tight ring of tiny, minuscule dots. Because your brain compares the center circle to its immediate surroundings, Circle A suddenly appears massive.
Right, it looks like a giant planet surrounded by tiny moons.
Exactly. Now imagine Circle B is surrounded by massive, giant, overlapping circles. Because Circle B is dwarfed by its neighbors, it suddenly appears incredibly tiny.
Even though it's the exact same size.
The actual objective size of the center circles never changed by a single millimeter, but your perception of them contrasts violently based on the background canvas.
Perceptual contrast in the visual system is easy enough to accept, but how does that translate to abstract concepts or semantic anchors?
To understand the conceptual application, we can look at a fascinating piece of research conducted by Alexander Chernev in 2011 involving nutritional valuation.
Nutritional valuation, okay.
He wanted to see if the contrast effect could alter how we perceive calories. So he brought participants in and asked them to estimate the number of calories in a standard, typical cheeseburger.
A fairly difficult task if you aren't actively tracking macros.
Exactly. But before they gave their estimates, he primed their brains with different semantic anchors. For the first group of participants, he had them actively think about and visualize an organic fruit salad. This serves as an extreme low-calorie semantic anchor.
So it's the equivalent of the tiny minuscule dots surrounding Circle A.
Precisely. When the group that had just been meditating on a light, airy fruit salad looked at the greasy cheeseburger, the contrast effect was triggered immediately. The cheeseburger suddenly seemed wildly, dangerously high in calories.
They adjusted away from it.
They adjusted their estimates away from the low semantic anchor, guessing the burger contained far more calories than it actually did.
And the second group?
The second group was primed to think about a decadent triple chocolate cheesecake. This is an extreme, high-calorie, heavy semantic anchor. It is the giant circle surrounding Circle B.
Right.
When this group looked at the exact same identical cheeseburger, the contrast effect worked in reverse. Compared to a massive slice of chocolate cheesecake, a standard cheeseburger seemed relatively light, lean, and reasonable. They guessed the burger had significantly fewer calories than it actually did.
The mechanics of this are just unbelievable. The anchor in this scenario isn't just a starting point for mental math. It acts as the background canvas that forces the subject to look either excessively bright or excessively dark by comparison.
Exactly. When you deploy extreme semantic anchors, they trigger a contrast effect, which actively pushes the brain's perception in the opposite direction of the anchor.
This represents a massive strategic advantage for anyone selling a product, pitching a novel idea to a board, or even just trying to negotiate a chore schedule with a spouse.
Oh, absolutely.
If you want to make your offer look incredibly reasonable, affordable, or easy to execute, presenting it in a vacuum is the worst thing you can do. It forces the person to generate their own anchor.
Which is unpredictable.
Exactly. Instead, you must precede your offer with a semantic anchor that is extremely heavy, difficult, expensive, or unreasonable. You purposefully trigger a favorable contrast. Your perfectly reasonable option suddenly looks like a miraculous, life-saving compromise compared to the extreme anchor you just planted in their working memory.
Which serves as the perfect bridge into the persuader's toolkit. Now that we understand the neurological difference between assimilation and contrast, how do we architect these choices in the real world? How do businesses weaponize this theory to drive revenue?
Let's move out of the lab and into actionable business applications. I want to look specifically at how we construct choices using decoys and doors.
Let's tackle decoys first, as they rely heavily on a concept called asymmetric dominance.
Asymmetric dominance.
Right. Dan Ariely, one of the foremost behavioral economists, conducted what is now considered a legendary study on the pricing model of a major magazine subscription. Imagine you are a consumer on a landing page, and you are offered two straightforward choices for a subscription. Product A is an online-only digital subscription for $59. Product B is a combined online and physical print subscription for $125.
In that binary scenario, human beings have a very difficult time comparing the options because they have different attributes. It's hard to weigh the value of a physical magazine against a $66 price difference.
Exactly.
To avoid the cognitive pain of that complex decision, most people will just default to the cheaper option to minimize financial risk.
And your intuition is entirely backed by Ariely's data. When presented with just those two options, the vast majority of people chose the $59 online option. The $125 combined option looked expensive and unnecessary in comparison.
Makes sense.
But Ariely wanted to test the power of asymmetric dominance, so he introduced a decoy option to a second group of consumers. He presented three choices instead of two.
Okay, what were they?
Product A online only for $59. Product B online and print for $125. And the new decoy option, a print-only subscription for $125.
Wait, look at the math on that. You're offering a print-only version for $125, a version that gives you both print and digital access for the exact same price of $125.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind would ever purchase the print-only option? It is objectively, mathematically inferior in every way.
No one bought it. Out of all the participants, literally 0 people selected the print-only decoy. But its mere existence on the page fundamentally reorganized the psychological landscape of the consumers.
Why? If no one wants it, why does it matter?
Because of how the brain handles comparison. As you said, comparing A to B is hard.
Right.
But comparing B to the decoy is incredibly easy. The decoy serves as an extreme, heavily weighted anchor. Suddenly, the consumer isn't comparing the $125 combo to the $59 digital version. They're comparing the $125 combo to the $125 print-only version.
Oh, wow. Against that backdrop, the combo doesn't look like an expensive upgrade. It looks like the company made a massive pricing error and is giving away the digital access for free. It looks like an absolute steal.
It is the Ebbinghaus illusion applied to economics.
Yeah.
The decoy is the giant circle that makes the target option look completely irresistible.
Precisely. By introducing a third option that was similar to the target but asymmetrically dominated, meaning it was objectively worse in every way, Ariely bypassed the consumer's rational price sensitivity.
That's genius.
He massively drove up the selection of the more expensive $125 option, shifting the total revenue generated from that sample group to over $8,000. It was a massive, immediate increase in profit, generated entirely by adding a choice to the menu that literally nobody wanted.
You can see this architecture everywhere once you know to look for it.
Yeah.
Wine lists at restaurants use a massively overpriced bottle just to make the second most expensive bottle look like a reasonable compromise.
Oh, all the time.
But I love applying this to low-stakes, everyday social dynamics. Like, imagine you were trying to convince your friend group to pick your favorite Chinese restaurant for dinner, but the group is leaning heavily toward a Mexican place.
Okay, setting the scene.
If you just engage in a direct, logical debate, your Chinese restaurant versus the Mexican one, it's a toss-up. You are arguing A versus B. But if you introduce an asymmetrically dominated decoy...
You introduce a third option that anchors the entire semantic category of Chinese food.
Exactly. You interject and say, well, we could do the Mexican place or my favorite Chinese place, or we could go to that sketchy, rundown Chinese buffet by the highway that gave Dave food poisoning last year.
I love it.
Suddenly, your favorite Chinese place isn't competing against the Mexican place anymore. It is competing against the decoy. And compared to food poisoning, your favorite spot looks like the pinnacle of culinary safety and taste. You trigger the contrast effect, and you win the dinner debate without ever making a logical argument.
It is a subtle manipulation of the choice architecture, but it is devastatingly effective. Now let's examine the other major tool in this arsenal, the door-in-the-face technique.
Okay.
This takes the contrast effect we just discussed and applies it directly to social compliance and the psychological pressure of reciprocity.
This is one of the most famous frameworks in persuasion literature.
It is. It was meticulously researched by Robert Cialdini in 1975. He wanted to understand how extreme initial anchors could manipulate compliance rates for charitable requests.
Okay.
So he had his research team approach random college students walking across campus and ask them if they would be willing to volunteer as counselors at a local juvenile delinquency center.
That's a noble cause.
It is, but they didn't ask for a small favor. They anchored the request astronomically high. They asked the students to commit to volunteering for 2 hours a week, every single week, for a minimum of 2 years.
For a college student who is just trying to walk to class, that is an incomprehensibly massive ask. You are asking for a major life commitment from a stranger on a sidewalk.
Predictably, it was universally rejected. Almost every single student flatly refused. It was, quite literally, a slammed door in the face of the researcher.
Right.
But the rejection was exactly what the researchers wanted. They were intentionally setting an extreme semantic anchor. Immediately after the student declined the massive 2-year commitment, the researcher feigned a concession and followed up with a vastly smaller request.
The actual target.
Exactly. They sighed and said, well, if you can't do that, would you be willing to just chaperone a group of these juvenile delinquents on a single 2-hour day trip to the zoo?
Okay, let's analyze the contrast here.
Yeah.
A single one-off 2-hour trip to a zoo versus 2 years of weekly grueling volunteer work.
Right. And to understand the power of this contrast, Gialdini tested the zoo request in isolation. When researchers approached a control group of students and only asked about the zoo trip with no prior massive request, only 17% of the students agreed to go.
It is still a decent-sized favor for a stranger to ask.
It is. But for the experimental group, when the exact same zoo trip was presented immediately following the massive rejected 2-year anchor, compliance skyrocketed to an astonishing 50%.
That is almost a 3-fold increase in compliance for the exact same task, simply by changing the conversation that preceded it.
The massive first request anchored the students' internal subconscious perception of what commitment looked like. Against the terrifying backdrop of 2 years of weekly unpaid labor, a single 2-hour stroll through the zoo looked absolutely microscopic.
It's the Ebbinghaus illusion again.
Yes. The contrast effect actively minimized the perceived burden of the real target request. Furthermore, because the researcher retreated from their initial massive demand, the student felt a subconscious psychological pressure to reciprocate that concession by agreeing to the smaller favor.
The strategic takeaway for the listener here is undeniable. When you are presenting options, negotiating a contract, or asking a colleague for a favor, never present your actual target option in a vacuum. A naked request forces the other person to evaluate it based on its own merits, which invites scrutiny. You must always provide an asymmetrically dominated decoy or deploy an initial extreme request to intentionally frame the final choice exactly where you want it to land.
That's exactly right.
If you are a manager and you need a $5,000 budget approved for a new software tool, you do not walk into the finance office and ask for $5,000.
No, because if you ask for $5,000, you are setting a low anchor and they will adjust downward and offer you $3,000.
Exactly. Instead, you outline a grand, comprehensive, sweeping departmental upgrade that requires $15,000. You let them hyperventilate. You let them slam the door in your face, and then you visibly concede. You scale it back to the bare-bones compromise of just the software tool for $5,000. Through the magic of perceptual contrast, $5,000 no longer looks like an expense. It looks like $10,000 in savings.
You are meticulously setting the anchor to build the scale upon which you will be judged. And it is crucial to recognize that this architecture doesn't just apply to pricing models or charitable requests. It applies just as heavily to the management of expectations.
That is a brilliant point. You can subtly anchor someone's expectations of your performance before an event even takes place.
Like what?
Well, if you are a student handing in a final term paper to a professor, and as you hand it over, you say, I really poured my absolute soul into this research. I genuinely believe this is worthy of an A. You have not just made a passing comment. You have planted a heavy anchor in their working memory.
And the mechanics of that are profound. Before the professor has processed a single sentence of your essay, their internal non-conscious grading scale has been anchored to the absolute top of the rubric. As they read, if they find a flaw, they will adjust downward from an A to an A-. If you hadn't planted the anchor, they might have started their evaluation at a baseline C and forced you to earn your way up. By anchoring high, you bias their entire cognitive evaluation process in your favor.
We have mapped out a massive expanse of psychological territory today. I want to pull all of these complex threads together into a cohesive theory.
I think if we synthesize the entirety of this deep dive from Kahneman and Tversky's adjustment heuristic saving us cognitive calories, to Wilson's proof that willpower cannot stop a prime, the evolutionary search for the freezing point of vodka, Airlie's asymmetrically dominated magazine decoys, and Cialdini's door-in-the-face contrast effects, it all converges on one inescapable fundamental truth about the architecture of the human mind.
Which is?
The brain is structurally incapable of measuring value in a vacuum. We simply do not possess an internal, objective, perfectly calibrated ruler for worth, price, or effort.
Because objective measurement requires too much energy, we are biologically hardwired to constantly search for a point of comparison.
Always. We do not judge objects, numbers, or concepts based on their absolute intrinsic worth. We judge them strictly by their relative distance to whatever is closest. And the anchor is always the closest thing.
Right.
Therefore, whoever possesses the strategic foresight to set the anchor is the person who builds the scale. If you control the initial injection of information, you dictate the boundaries of reality for the person making the judgment.
Which brings me to a final, slightly provocative thought that I want to leave you, the listener, with today.
Okay.
For the last hour, we have talked almost exclusively about how to weaponize anchors against other people, or how corporations and businesses deploy them against us as consumers. But I want you to turn this mechanism inward for just a moment.
Interesting.
Think critically about the expectations you currently hold for your own life. Your expected income trajectory, your timeline for career success, the baseline quality of your personal relationships, your physical fitness goals. Are those goals actually based on an objective measurement of your true, limitless potential?
That's a heavy question.
Or are you simply adjusting off a self-generated, completely artificial anchor based on an arbitrary comment someone made to you a decade ago? Did a high school teacher once tell you that you were just average at complex math? Did a parent establish a highly specific expectation for what a successful salary looks like?
It is a profound and honestly an uncomfortable question to ask yourself. We spend so much of our lives operating entirely within the boundaries of psychological anchors we didn't even realize were set for us.
Exactly. Take a hard, unforgiving look at the limits you've subconsciously placed on your own capabilities. Ask yourself, who set the anchor for your life? And more importantly, is it finally time for you to rip it out of the ground and set an entirely new one? I
Wow.
want you to mull that over. But before you do, remember this critical next step. Once you've successfully anchored someone's perception, whether it's a client, a partner, or yourself, how do you ensure they actually follow through on that new reality?
You'll have to tune in next time.
That's right. Next time, we will dive headfirst into Chapter 3 of Kolenda's work, Convey High Expectations. We will discover how simply acting as though someone will agree with you can magically orchestrate a psychological, self-fulfilling prophecy. It is mind-bending, practical stuff. Until then, keep digging.
So, I want to start off with a question for you, and for everyone listening. If one of the greatest musicians in the world, right, played a multi-million-dollar violin in a crowded subway station, would you stop to listen? Or would you just walk right by?
Oh, wow. I mean, you'd like to think you'd stop, right? But I have a feeling I know where this is going.
Yeah, I mean, picture this scene for a second. It's this freezing morning in a major city, like total rush hour. You're holding your lukewarm coffee, just hurrying down the steps into the subway station.
Right, just trying to get to work,
Yeah.
head down.
Exactly, head down. And there's this guy in faded jeans, a long-sleeve T-shirt, wearing a Washington Nationals baseball cap. And he's just positioned against a wall near a trash can.
Very glamorous setting.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he takes out a violin, leaves his case open to catch, some loose change, and he just starts playing. But he doesn't just play some simple folk tune or whatever.
You see the hard stuff.
Right. He plays some of the most intricate, complex, just beautiful classical music ever written by Bach. And for 45 minutes, thousands of people stream past him.
And let me guess, nobody cares.
Barely anyone. Most don't even turn their heads. Like a few toss in a quarter without even breaking their stride. So he eventually packs up his case, takes the roughly, I think it was $32 he made in pocket change, and just walks away.
$32 for a master class.
Yeah. Because what none of those commuters knew was that this guy in the baseball cap was Joshua Bell, like one of the most famous violin virtuosos on the planet.
Oh, that's wild. So he was playing a Stradivarius then?
Yes. A violin worth over $3 million. And the crazy thing is, just a few days prior, he had sold out a massive theater where people paid hundreds of dollars a seat just to sit in silence and hear him play the exact same pieces of music.
The exact same music. That is, I mean, the contrast there is just staggering.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because how does a musical genius go from commanding hundreds of dollars a ticket to being completely ignored for pocket change, literally overnight?
Well, it doesn't lie in the acoustics of the subway station, I can tell you that. Or even the sheer busyness of the commute. If you look at the psychology of the people walking by, the reason they ignore him in a subway but empty their bank accounts to see him in a theater, it comes down entirely to the lens of expectation.
Expectation. Wow.
Yeah, because when people walk into a grand concert hall, you know, the architecture, the ticket price, the velvet seats, all of it creates this massive expectation of greatness.
Yeah, you're primed for it.
Exactly. But when they walk through a subway station smelling of old pretzels, they expect a mediocre street busker. And the human brain, it doesn't just hold an expectation as like a passive thought.
Well,
It actually uses that expectation to dictate and filter their entire physical reality.
and that is exactly what we are getting into today. The notes for this deep dive explore this terrifying but also kind of fascinating concept that your expectations don't just predict the future, they actually actively construct it.
They build it from the ground up.
Right. We're looking at Chapter 3 of our source material, which is all about how to convey high expectations. And if you're listening to this and you're trying to build a business, launch a product, or, I don't know, even just improve how you communicate with people, this is a completely different way to view human nature.
It really is a paradigm shift.
Yeah, because you're going to see how human expectations literally rewrite our biological perception. We're talking about realizing that things like pricing, branding, and the very first impression you make, they aren't just clever marketing tools.
Right. They aren't just tricks.
No, they are the actual psychological blueprints that construct the reality of whoever you are interacting with.
Yeah, you have to think of an expectation not as a guess about what might happen, but as a rendering engine.
A rendering engine,
Yeah.
like in a video game.
Exactly like that. Your brain, it just doesn't have the processing power to objectively analyze every single piece of sensory data coming in at every second. It would completely overload.
So it takes shortcuts.
Right. To save energy, it uses what we call predictive coding. It builds a model of what it expects to see or hear or taste, and then it simply projects that model onto reality.
It just paints over the raw data.
Basically, yeah. Once that filter is in place, your brain will actively mold your sensory experience to make sure that what you experience matches the model it already built.
Okay, wait, I need to push back on this right away.
Yeah.
Because you're saying we aren't objectively experiencing the world at all.
Basically, yes.
I mean, I get that our opinions can be swayed, sure. But it sounds like you are saying expectations physically change our biological experience of something in the moment.
I'm saying exactly that. Your biology alters its physical response based on what you believe is about to happen.
That is wild.
It is. Let's look at one of the most famous corporate rivalries in history to see this in action, right? Coke versus Pepsi.
Oh, the Pepsi paradox. I love this example.
Right. We've all seen the marketing campaigns, but the underlying neuroscience is what is truly wild here.
Okay, so the setup here is that in non-blind taste tests, where people can clearly see the red Coke can and the blue Pepsi can, they overwhelmingly claim they prefer the taste of Coca-Cola, right?
Right. The brand dominance wins out.
But then when you strip away the branding and do a blind taste test, the preference actually flips. The objective data on the tongue says Pepsi tastes better to a majority of people.
Yeah, and the paradox usually stops there in popular culture, right? Just proving that marketing works. But researchers, they wanted to know how it works.
Like what's happening in the brain?
Exactly. Are people just lying in the non-blind test to align with the more popular brand, or is something else happening? To find out, neurologists looked at a very specific demographic of people.
Who do they look at?
Patients with damage to their ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
Okay, big words. What does that specific part of the brain do?
So the ventromedial prefrontal cortex acts as a critical bridge. It connects raw, objective sensory data with emotional memories and associations.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so when you see a brand logo, that part of the brain pulls up all the emotional resonance you have with that brand childhood memories, those polar bear Santa Claus commercials, feelings of happiness, and it overlays it onto what you are actually experiencing.
Okay, so if a patient has damage to that specific bridge, they are biologically unable to mix the emotion of the brand with the physical taste of the soda.
Correct. They're essentially perfectly objective consumers.
Wow. So what happened when they tested them?
The results were definitive. When these specific patients were given a non-blind taste test, meaning they could clearly see the Coke and Pepsi logo sitting right in front of them, they preferred Pepsi.
Wait, even when they could see the Coke can?
Even though they knew they were drinking Coke, and even though they knew Coke was the dominant brand, they preferred Pepsi.
Because they couldn't process the marketing.
Exactly. Because their emotional processing center was compromised, they were left solely with the raw sensory data on their tongue. And the raw data says Pepsi is sweeter and just generally preferred.
So that implies the rest of us, with our intact emotional processing centers, we're literally tasting the marketing.
We really are.
Our brains use the expectation of Coke superiority to artificially alter the physical flavor profile of a liquid. Like, the brand actually changes the flavor.
The brand is literally an ingredient, and this biological override, it happens across the board, especially when we start talking about the expectation of value, like price tags.
Okay, yeah, price tag. There's a study in the notes about this, right?
Yeah, there's a phenomenal study by Plasman and colleagues from 2008, and it involves wine.
Right, the wine study.
So they brought subjects into a lab, put them inside a functional MRI machine, which, for those who don't know, measures brain activity in real time by tracking blood flow.
Right.
And they gave them sips of wine through a tube.
Drinking wine through a tube inside a loud magnetic tube. Not exactly a romantic vineyard experience.
No, highly clinical, very weird setting. But before each sip, the subjects were shown the price of the wine they were about to taste on a screen.
Okay.
Sometimes they were told the wine cost $5. Other times they were told it was a premium vintage costing $45 or $90.
Okay, let me guess the outcome here. They rated the $90 wine as tasting significantly better than the $5 wine.
Of course they did.
But again, I have to be skeptical here.
Yeah.
If I'm in a lab with a bunch of scientists in lab coats and they hand me a $90 wine, I am absolutely going to nod and say it has like notes of oak and blackberry, just so I don't look uncultured.
Right, you don't want to look cheap.
Exactly. Are they really experiencing better wine, or are they just succumbing to social pressure?
And that is the beauty of the fMRI machine. It doesn't care about social pressure. It only looks at neurochemistry.
It's just reading the blood flow.
Right. The researchers weren't just asking for their verbal opinion. They were actively watching the orbitofrontal cortex.
Which is what? The pleasure center.
Yes. The orbitofrontal cortex is the area of the brain directly associated with the subjective experience of pleasantness.
Okay.
When you eat chocolate or, hug someone you love, this area lights up like a Christmas tree. And here's the trick of the Plasman study. All the wine they drank was identical.
Wait, all of it?
All of it. It was the exact same cheap wine, just paired with different price tags on a screen.
So the physical liquid hitting their tongue never changed once.
Exactly the same molecular composition every single time. Yet, when the subjects drank the wine they believed was the $90 vintage, the fMRI scans showed massive spikes in neural activity in the orbitofrontal cortex.
So they weren't faking it.
They weren't faking their enjoyment to look sophisticated at all. Their brains were literally manufacturing more physical pleasure.
That is insane.
The higher price tag sparked a biological expectation of high quality, and the brain fulfilled its own expectation by physically turning up the dial on pleasantness.
So the expectation of pleasure actually creates the pleasure. It feels like we're basically discussing the placebo effect, but like applying it to consumer goods instead of medicine.
You hit the nail on the head. The mechanism is absolutely identical.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. In medicine, a doctor hands you a sugar pill and tells you it's a highly powerful painkiller. Your brain expects the pain to drop.
Right.
To ensure reality matches the expectation, your brain releases endogenous opioids, your body's natural painkillers.
Right.
The expectation triggers the biological pharmacy.
Wow.
In commerce, a high price tag acts as the doctor's promise.
That makes so much sense. And there is another study in the notes that takes this beyond just, subjective pleasure and into measurable human performance. The Shiv study from 2005 involving energy drinks.
Oh, this one is crucial because it removes the subjectivity of taste entirely.
Right, it's about output.
Exactly. The researchers had participants buy a functional energy drink one that explicitly claims to boost mental acuity and focus.
Okay.
One group paid the standard retail price, which was $1.89.
Sure.
A second group bought the exact same energy drink, but they were told they were getting it through a special institutional discount for just 89 cents.
Okay, so same caffeine, same taurine, same sugar. The only difference is the amount of money leaving their physical wallet.
Exactly. After they drank it, Both groups were given a series of complex mental puzzles to solve. The researchers wanted to see if the cognitive boost promised by the drink would actually materialize.
I'm anticipating the result based on the wine study, but it still sounds absurd to say out loud. You're telling me the group that paid full price actually performed better on the puzzles?
They performed significantly better. The group that received the discount struggled way more with the mental task.
Just because they got it on sale.
Think about the unconscious calculation their brains made. The brain sees a steep discount and associates it with cheapness.
You get what you pay for.
Right. It thinks, this was cheap, therefore it must be of lower quality, therefore it won't work as well. That lowered expectation became a biological reality. Their cognitive performance physically degraded because they got a bargain.
I want to make sure I'm fully wrapping my head around this.
Yeah.
Let me try an analogy on you.
Go for it.
Say I decide I want to get into running. I go to the store and buy a top-of-the-line $250 pair of carbon-plated running shoes.
Nice shoes.
Right. I put them on, I look down at the famous logo, and I head out the door. Is my brain literally saying, we have elite equipment now, therefore we are an athlete, and physically altering my output?
Yeah.
Like, am I recruiting different muscle fibers just because of the price tag?
It is a phenomenal analogy, and yes, absolutely. Yes, the high price tag and the elite branding set a soaring expectation of speed and efficiency. Your brain uses that expectation as a biological shortcut.
It just assumes the shoe is doing the work.
It assumes the equipment will enhance performance, so it lowers its own internal governors on fatigue. It allows you to push harder because it expects the shoes to carry the load. The expectation literally alters your physical output.
Translating this into practical terms, especially if you are listening to this and you're running a business or selling a service, discounting your product doesn't just slice your profit margin. It literally degrades the customer's physical and mental experience of your product.
It genuinely does.
Like, if I sell a premium consulting package but constantly offer 50% off, my client's brain will unconsciously categorize my advice as cheap. They will literally perceive my strategies as less effective simply because they paid less for them.
Exactly.
High pricing manufactures a higher quality experience.
It should make anyone who relies on heavy discounting deeply uncomfortable.
Seriously.
You are actively training your customer's brain to devalue what you do on a biological level. You are quite literally starving their orbitofrontal cortex of the pleasure they would have experienced if you had just charged them more.
Because you aren't just selling a product. You are selling the expectation of the product. The actual deliverable is almost secondary to the psychological framing around it.
The framing is everything.
Okay, that covers what happens in our biology, but I am still stuck on the mechanics of it. Like, if our brains are capable of this massive self-deception, how does it actually pull off the magic trick? What is the mental machinery behind these blind spots?
To understand the gears turning behind the scenes, we need to look at 3 specific psychological mechanisms that make expectations so dominant.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first is anchoring, the second is confirmation bias, and the third is selective avoidance.
Let's start with anchoring. Because in the business world, you usually hear about anchoring in negotiations, like whoever throws out the first number in a salary negotiation anchors the rest of the conversation.
Right, that's the most common application people know. Anchoring is just the brain's tendency to latch on to the very first piece of information it receives, the anchor, and then adjust all future judgments based on that starting point.
It sets the baseline.
Exactly. When you set an expectation, you are dropping an anchor into the psyche of your audience. If I recommend a movie to you by saying, this is the funniest film made in the last 10 years, I have dropped a massive, heavy anchor.
Yeah, you've set the bar incredibly high.
And when you sit down in the theater, your brain starts its evaluation from that high point.
But the source material throws a warning flag here, doesn't it? It mentions that expectations can backfire aggressively if they are too extreme. If anchoring works so well, why wouldn't I just set the expectation astronomically high every single time?
Because of how the brain calculates prediction error.
Prediction errors.
Yeah, if the anchor is set too high, it triggers what we call a contrast effect. Let's say you write a new fiction book, right?
Right.
I want to help you promote it, so I tell a mutual friend, this book is going to change the fabric of human consciousness. It is a flawless masterpiece that makes Shakespeare look like an amateur.
I would tell you to scale back the marketing because no book can live up to that.
Right, and that is the problem. The expectation is so absurdly high, so fundamentally implausible, that when your friend reads the first chapter and finds it to be just a normal, decent book, Their brain registers a massive gap between the expectation and reality.
And that gap is the prediction error.
Yes. This gap is a prediction error, and the brain experiences prediction errors as frustration or disappointment. Because the anchor was so extreme, the contrast makes the book seem significantly worse than if I had said nothing at all.
Wow.
They will judge your book harshly simply because it failed to meet an impossible standard.
So the brain essentially rebounds violently in the opposite direction.
It snaps back.
The key to setting an expectation anchor, then, is that it must be high enough to elevate their perception, but it must remain entirely plausible.
Plausible is the magic word.
You want their subjective experience to drift toward the anchor, which is assimilation, not bounce off it in frustration, which is the contrast effect.
Assimilation is the goal. You want the ambiguity of their experience to be pulled upward by the gravity of your high expectation.
That makes total sense. Which moves us to the second gear in the machinery, confirmation bias.
Yes.
We hear this term constantly, mostly in the context of cable news and politics, like people only watch the channels that agree with them. But how does it operate mechanically when we are talking about expectations?
Think about human evolution for a second. Our brains evolved to make quick, energy-efficient decisions just to keep us alive.
Sure.
Reevaluating every single piece of evidence constantly takes massive cognitive energy. So we developed confirmation bias, which is the natural tendency to seek out, favor, and remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs while aggressively ignoring or discounting data that contradicts them.
Because being wrong takes too much energy to process.
It literally hurts. Realizing you are wrong causes a state of cognitive dissonance. It actually triggers the anterior cingulate cortex, which is a part of the brain that also registers physical pain.
Wait, our brains literally hurt when we are wrong.
Yes. So, to protect ourselves from that pain, we build a filter to prove ourselves right.
The notes offer an incredibly simple example of this using a Google search.
Oh, the climate change one.
Yeah. If you want to research climate change and you open a browser and type the effects of global warming, your confirmation bias has already rigged the game.
Yep.
The search phrase itself assumes the premise is true. The search engine is going to feed you millions of results detailing the effects, which will only solidify the underlying expectation you started with.
You are outsourcing your confirmation bias to an algorithm at that point. But if you want a much more visceral biological example of how much pain we feel when our expectations are disconfirmed, consider the phenomenon of hearing a recording of your own voice.
Oh God, I am so glad this is in the notes.
We all hate it.
Anyone who has ever had to leave a voicemail or edit their own audio or watch a video of themselves speaking knows this absolute horror. You hear the playback and you instantly think, do I really sound that whiny? Is my voice really that nasal?
It is a nearly universal reaction,
Yeah.
and it is entirely driven by a violent collision of expectations and reality. Well, when you speak in your day-to-day life, the sound waves don't just travel outward through the air to your ears. A significant portion of the sound travels internally, vibrating through the bones, tissues, and fluids of your skull and neck.
Which acts like an acoustic filter, right?
A very specific filter. Bone conduction acts like a bass boost. It lowers the frequency of the sound waves, so the voice you hear inside your head is deeper, richer, and far more resonant than the voice anyone else hears.
Which means, for my entire life, my brain has been building an expectation that I have this smooth, authoritative, deep voice.
Exactly. You have constructed a rock-solid expectation over decades. But when you hit play on a recording, that internal bone conduction is entirely stripped away.
It's just the raw audio.
You are suddenly hearing your true external voice through air conduction only. It is higher, it's thinner, and it's completely foreign. And because it violates the deep-seated expectation your brain has built up, your brain violently rejects it.
You cringe.
You cringe, you experience cognitive dissonance, and what do most people do?
They blame the microphone.
Right. They think the equipment must be cheap. My phone mic is broken.
That is hilarious and painfully accurate.
Yeah.
Our brains would rather blame the laws of physics and audio equipment than admit our internal expectation is wrong. We aggressively defend the anchor.
We protect it at all costs.
Which brings us to the third mechanism, which seems to be the ultimate defense system: selective avoidance.
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy.
When confirmation bias isn't enough to twist the data, we just pretend the data doesn't exist at all.
We literally edit reality like a film director cutting a bad scene.
Give me an example.
The notes include a classic optical illusion to demonstrate this. Imagine a simple, short sentence printed in large, bold letters on a white piece of paper. It reads, Our brains can be a mystery.
Our brains can be a mystery. You're putting two A's in a row.
Yes, the word A is printed twice consecutively. But when most people look at that sentence for the first time, they don't even see the typo. They completely skip the second A and read it smoothly as, our brains can be a mystery.
I've totally fallen for this trick before. But why does the visual cortex just refuse to see the second word?
Because your expectation of standard English grammar is incredibly strong. As your eyes scan the first few words, your brain's predictive coding jumps ahead and anticipates the structure of the rest of the sentence.
It already knows what's supposed to be there.
It knows there should only be one A. So when the raw visual data hits your retina and contradicts that expectation, the brain has to make a choice. It can either spend cognitive energy stopping, reevaluating the grammar, and registering the error,
Or just delete the extra word to maintain the smooth flow of reading.
Exactly. It's like a video game rendering engine, like we talked about earlier. To save RAM, the game only renders the textures of the room you are currently looking at. The brain only renders the words it expects to be there to save processing power. It just declines to render the second A.
It is an aggressive, real-time autocorrect. You selectively avoid the discrepancy to maintain the integrity of your expectation.
It's an incredible defense mechanism.
I want to apply this to a business scenario, because this is where it gets highly manipulative, honestly.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our brains are so desperate to confirm what we already expect, right, and we're so willing to literally delete visual or sensory data that contradicts it, does that mean a customer will actively ignore the flaws in a product if I successfully set their expectation high enough in the beginning?
If you look at the mechanics of the brain we just discussed, the answer is undeniably yes.
Really?
Humans will go to great lengths to avoid the pain of disconfirmed expectations. If you convince a customer that your new software platform is the most intuitive, seamless tool on the market, and you set a strong, plausible anchor for that expectation, their brain will immediately go to work to prove you right.
Because they don't want to feel the pain of being wrong.
Right. So when they log in and encounter a minor bug or like a slightly confusing dashboard, their confirmation bias will activate.
They won't see the bug as a failure of the software.
They will minimize it. Or even better for you, they will blame themselves. They will think, oh, I must have clicked the wrong button. The software is brilliant. I'm just using it wrong.
That is wild. You are turning the customer into their own defense attorney for your product. You drop the anchor, their confirmation bias actively hunts for reasons why the software is great, and their selective avoidance just deletes the memory of the bug entirely.
It is a foolproof reality distortion field generated entirely by their own neurology.
It is profoundly powerful. But up to this point, we have really only discussed what happens inside the mind of the individual, right? Like how you interpret a taste, a price, a recorded voice, or a typo on a page.
The internal stuff.
Yeah. But the paradigm shifts completely when we look at how expectations leak out of the individual mind and alter the physical world. Expectations don't just change internal interpretation. They actively manipulate the physical behavior of other people.
This is where we move into the realm of the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. We aren't just constructing our own reality anymore. We are forcing reality to bend to our assumptions. The notes use a fantastic hypothetical scenario to illustrate this feedback loop. It's about a woman named Emily.
Yes, the Emily scenario. Let's walk through the mechanics of how this works.
Okay.
Imagine you are at a social gathering. A mutual friend of yours, Debbie, comes up and says she wants to introduce you to a woman named Emily.
Okay, standard party stuff.
But just before you walk over, Debbie whispers, just a heads up, Emily can be pretty cold and standoffish. She's not a very friendly person.
Okay, so Debbie just dropped a massive anchor. I haven't even seen Emily yet, but my brain is already building a predictive model of a rude, unpleasant person.
Precisely. You are fully primed. So you walk up to Emily, based entirely on the expectation Debbie planted. How do you physicalize your behavior when you say hello?
Well, I mean, I'm going to protect myself, obviously. I'm not going to give her a warm, vulnerable smile.
Right.
I'll probably keep my arms crossed, maintain a bit of physical distance, and give very short, clipped answers. I'm not going to extend any warmth to someone I've been told is a jerk.
Exactly. You adopt a defensive, closed-off posture. Your micro-expressions are tight. Your tone is flat.
Yeah.
Now look at this from Emily's perspective.
Yeah.
She is meeting you for the very first time. She has no prior expectations about you. But the reality she is experiencing is a person walking up to her acting cold, guarded, and entirely unfriendly.
Wow.
How is her brain going to react to your behavior?
We have mirror neurons.
Yeah.
She is going to unconsciously mirror my energy. She's going to think, wow, this person is a jerk, and she's going to act cold and standoffish right back to me.
And the loop is complete. Your initial expectation is confirmed. You walk away thinking Debbie was absolutely right. Emily is incredibly rude.
But look at the objective reality. Emily wasn't rude at all. Emily was just reacting to me.
Exactly. You were rude based on a false expectation,
Oh.
and your physical behavior forced Emily to become the exact thing you expected her to be.
My assumption was the first domino. I literally manufactured her hostility. But wait, what if Debbie was actually right? What if Emily actually is a jerk?
It doesn't matter. The mechanism operates the same way regardless of Emily's true nature.
How so?
If you had walked up to her expecting her to be the warmest, most delightful person in the room, you would have smiled, opened your body language, and spoken with enthusiasm.
Right, I'd be super friendly.
And even if she was having a bad day, your overwhelming warmth would heavily pressure her to respond in kind. It pulls her toward your expectation.
This plays out in so many different arenas. The notes mention a simple analogy of studying for an exam.
Yeah, classic example.
If a student holds a deep expectation that they are going to fail, maybe they think they aren't smart enough, or the teacher hates them, what happens? They don't study.
Right. The brain calculates that if failure is inevitable, expanding the cognitive energy to study is just a waste of resources.
And because they withhold the effort, they fail the exam. The expectation guaranteed its own reality.
It's a closed loop. And the author of the source material, Nick Kolenda, he actually provides a very vulnerable meta-example of this loop concerning the creation of his book itself.
Oh yes, the ramen noodle diet.
Yeah. He explains that he held an incredibly high expectation for the success of the book he was writing. He genuinely believed it was going to be brilliant and widely read.
So he anchored himself high.
Extremely high. And because that expectation was so high, it altered his physical behavior drastically. To write it, he quit a lucrative consulting job. He lived on a diet of cheap ramen noodles just to stretch his savings.
That is dedication.
He worked grueling 15-hour days slaving over the manuscript, editing and re-editing.
But so his belief in the book's success forced him into the extreme labor required to actually make it successful.
Exactly.
Like if he had harbored a low expectation, if he thought, this is just a side project, nobody will probably read it, he would have kept his day job. He would have casually written a few pages on Sunday afternoons. The book would have been mediocre and it would have flopped.
It would have matched the low expectation.
The expectation didn't just predict the outcome, it literally generated the physical work ethic required to achieve the outcome.
The expectation is the engine. And there is an even more extreme example of this engine at work found in the author's background. Before writing about psychology, he spent time in the world of clinical hypnosis.
See, I am naturally skeptical of hypnosis. When I hear the word, I just picture a guy in a velvet suit making people cluck like chickens on a Las Vegas stage.
Right, well, that's stage magic, which relies heavily on peer pressure and selection bias.
Right.
Clinical hypnosis is entirely different. It is a genuine psychological intervention used for things like smoking cessation, trauma recovery, or weight loss.
Okay.
It involves guiding a patient into a highly focused, suggestible state. And what Kolenda notes from his experience is that the factor that determines whether someone is a quote-unquote superb subject for hypnosis has nothing to do with weak-mindedness or some mystical susceptibility.
What actually puts someone into a trance then?
Expectation.
Really, just expectation.
A superb subject is simply someone who walks into the clinic with a tremendously high expectation that the hypnosis is going to work. Because they expect to be hypnotized, they become incredibly compliant.
Oh, I see.
When the hypnotist says, relax your shoulders, they immediately relax their shoulders because they believe it's part of the process. When they are told to visualize a staircase, they visualize it vividly.
Their high expectation drives perfect compliance.
And that physical and mental compliance is exactly what induces the hypnotic state. The expectation fulfills itself.
So if the subject walks in thinking it's a scam, they resist the instructions, they don't relax, and the hypnosis fails, proving them right.
Exactly.
The implications of this for leadership and management are actually terrifying.
Oh, completely.
Think about it. If I'm a manager and I hire a new employee, but I secretly harbor the expectation that they don't have what it takes, I am the one dooming them to fail.
You are. Trace the physical manifestation of your internal assumption. If you expect them to fail, you won't trust them with important stretch assignments.
I'd probably micromanage them.
You will micromanage their small tasks. When you speak to them, your tone will lack the enthusiasm you show your top performers. Because of your confirmation bias, you will be hyper-fixated on their minor mistakes and completely blind to their successes.
And the employee's going to feel that. They will feel the lack of trust. They will become anxious. They will second-guess their decisions. Their motivation will tank. And ultimately, their performance will drop.
Which perfectly confirms your original expectation. You will sit in their performance review and think, I knew from day one they didn't have what it takes.
When in objective reality, my quiet internal expectation created a toxic environment that made their success impossible.
You created the failure.
We are always the first domino.
No.
But we can flip that script, right? If conveying a low expectation guarantees failure, conveying a high expectation should guarantee success.
It's the same mechanism, just a different direction.
Like, if I walk into the office genuinely believing my team is composed of highly capable, brilliant professionals, my physical behavior changes. I give them autonomy. I speak to them with confidence. I tolerate minor mistakes as learning opportunities.
By forcing yourself to convey high expectations, you force yourself to treat them as highly capable. And human beings have a profound tendency to rise to the level of the expectations placed upon them.
It's contagious.
It is. When treated as brilliant and capable, they take ownership, their confidence surges, and they deliver brilliant, capable work. Your initial behavior creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of success.
This is like the ultimate hack for any interaction. If I walk into a salary negotiation expecting a hostile, zero-sum battle, my posture is going to be defensive and aggressive from the moment I sit down.
And they will feel it.
The other party will mirror my aggression, and I will get the battle I expected. If I walk in expecting a collaborative problem-solving session, I generate that reality.
Which leads us perfectly to a critical realization about all of this.
What's that?
If our expectations dictate our opening moves, and our opening moves construct the reality of the interaction, it means the entire game is won or lost in the very first second you engage.
The opening move is everything.
Everything.
Which brings us to the final major concept we need to unpack here. The strategy of first impressions, and specifically, the neuroscience behind the primacy effect.
Yeah, we all have the colloquial wisdom that first impressions matter. You wear a suit to an interview, you smile when you meet your partner's parents.
Basic common sense.
But the psychological science behind why those early moments are so disproportionately powerful is rooted in how the brain handles sequential information. The primacy effect is a cognitive bias, stating that information presented early in a sequence carries exponentially more weight than information presented later.
The brain anchors on the very first thing it processes. The notes have a fantastic mental experiment to prove this.
Let's do it right now, just you and me.
Okay, I'm going to give you a math equation, and you have exactly 5 seconds to calculate the total value in your head. Ready?
Let's do it.
8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time. Okay, you have a rough estimate in your head.
Yep, I got it.
Now, imagine I walked into a different room, found a different person, and asked them to estimate this equation in 5 seconds. 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8.
Okay, it is the exact same equation, just reversed. The mathematical product is identical. 43,020.
Right. But when behavioral economists actually run this experiment, the estimates from the two groups are not even close to each other.
They are radically different. The group that hears the equation starting with 8 times 7 times 6 consistently produces median estimates in the thousands.
Wow.
The group that hears the equation starting with 1 times 2 times 3 produces median estimates in the hundreds.
Why? Because 5 seconds isn't nearly enough time for the human brain to calculate the compounding multiplication of 8 numbers.
Exactly. When the brain is put under time pressure and high cognitive load, it panics and takes a shortcut.
It anchors.
It grabs the first few pieces of data it encounters and uses them to anchor the expectation for the entire rest of the equation. If the brain hears 8 times 7 times 6, it calculates 56 times 6, sees the number getting very large very quickly, and anchors its final guess incredibly high.
Right, it assumes it's huge.
But if the brain hears 1 times 2 times 3, it calculates 2 times 3, sees a tiny number, and assumes the final total must be relatively small. The early sequence disproportionately infects the final judgment.
That is mind-bending. The order of the information literally changes the perceived value of the information. And this doesn't just apply to rapid-fire math, right?
Not at all.
It applies to how we judge human personality, which is what Solomon Asch proved in his legendary trait list study from 1946.
The Asch study is a foundational pillar of social psychology. He wanted to see how the primacy effect influenced our perception of character. So he took two groups of people. He told Group A that they were about to meet a person, and he described this hypothetical person using 6 traits.
Okay, let me read the traits. He tells Group A, the person is intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious.
Then he goes to Group B, and he describes the exact same person using the exact same 6 traits, but he simply reverses the order.
So he tells Group B, the person is envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, and intelligent.
The objective data is identical, 6 traits, but Group A gets hit with the positive traits first, intelligent and industrious.
And Group B gets hit with the negative traits, first, envious, and stubborn.
The results were a perfect mirror of the math equation. Group A, who heard the positive traits first, formed a highly favorable overall impression of the person. Group B, hearing the negative traits first, formed a deeply negative impression.
I want to explore the why here. Why doesn't the brain just collect all 6 traits, put them on a scale, and weigh them equally? Like, why does it lock in so fast?
Because humans are cognitive misers.
Cognitive misers.
The human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's caloric energy despite being only 2% of its weight. Thinking is physically exhausting.
It burns calories.
To conserve that precious energy, we take cognitive shortcuts whenever we possibly can. We desperately want to avoid the effort of continuously evaluating and reevaluating new information. So once we form an initial impression, an initial expectation, we essentially shut down active processing.
We just decide our first guess is accurate enough and close the file.
Yes. When Group A heard intelligent, industrious, their brain said, excellent, this is a highly capable, good person, mystery solved, I can stop thinking now.
So what happens when they hear the bad words?
When the later words like stubborn and envious were read, the brain minimized them to protect the initial anchor. It rationalized, well, they are smart and hardworking, so their stubbornness is probably just passionate dedication to their work.
Wow. Confirmation bias instantly acts as a PR spin doctor for the first impression.
Exactly. And for Group B, they heard envious, stubborn, and immediately decided this person is a toxic jerk.
So when intelligent finally came up at the end of the list, their brain probably spun it as a negative. They thought, oh, great, a smart jerk. They are going to be manipulative.
The early information sets the immovable filter through which all subsequent information must pass.
The practical application of this is monumental. It means that the classic advice of, saving the best for last is completely wrong.
It is the worst advice you could follow.
You cannot build a slow burn in a business pitch, in the YouTube video, or in a product launch. You can't save your most compelling argument for the grand finale.
Saving the best for last is cognitive suicide. You must front-load your strongest, most positive, most undeniable arguments immediately.
They're right at the top.
If you are pitching a new client in a boardroom, your first 3 sentences are carrying the weight of the entire hour-long presentation. If you are designing a landing page for a website, the hero section at the very top of the page is doing 90% of the heavy lifting.
Because it's setting the anchor.
Those first few seconds dictate the expectation filter. If you start weak or slow or confusing, their brain decides you are weak and confusing.
And then they shut down.
They will cognitively tune out, and when you finally get to your brilliant point 20 minutes later, their selective avoidance will ensure they don't even process it.
It is all about establishing that towering anchor immediately, so their own cognitive biases do the heavy lifting of defending you. Let's pull all these threads together. This has been an incredibly dense dive into the mechanics of the mind. How do we synthesize the Pepsi paradox, the $90 wine, the ramen diet, and the Asch trait into one core philosophy?
I think the overarching truth connecting all these mechanisms is this. Expectations are not passive observations about what the future might hold. They are the active biological architects of that future.
That is the perfect distillation. From the literal neurochemistry of our brains, the orbitofrontal cortex lighting up to manufacture physical pleasure simply because a price tag is high, to the cognitive filters we apply. Like our visual cortex literally refusing to render a AA in a sentence because we don't expect it to be there.
Right through to the physical actions we take in the real world. Treating a stranger coldly based on a rumor, thereby ensuring they act coldly in return.
It all connects.
Conveying a high expectation is the ultimate shortcut to molding a favorable reality. When you operate in business, you aren't just selling a product or a service. You are selling the expectation of that product.
The physical product is just the vehicle. The expectation you set is the actual reality the customer is going to inhabit.
And if you don't set it, someone else will.
It changes how you view every interaction. Your pricing strategy, your brand colors, your opening handshake, the first slide in your pitch deck, the first 10 seconds of your video. It's all architecture. You are building the walls of the reality your audience is about to walk into.
And if you build those walls tall, strong, and exceptionally high right out of the gate, their own psychology will keep the roof from caving in.
This has been absolutely brilliant. But as we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you, the listener, with a deep, lingering thought to explore on your own. We've spent all this time analyzing how to use high expectations to mold the reality of your customers, your clients, and the people around you. We've discussed how to use pricing and first impressions to hack other people's cognitive biases. But if expectations literally construct objective reality, what kind of reality are you inadvertently creating for yourself right now, based entirely on the quiet internal expectations you hold about your own potential?
That is the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy.
Something to think about the next time you catch yourself, assuming you can't pull something off. But what if setting a mental expectation isn't enough? Next time, we'll explore how forcing someone to radically shift their physical body language might be the secret mechanical lever to unlocking a completely new attitude. Until then, keep diving deep.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.